Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Parallel Deku, back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku and Group Had a Study Session. Now before starting, please give this video a like, and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Life was odd, new, unexpected and disorienting for the first while. Nobody had ever lived away from home, with exception to short vacations or traveling. This was different. There was a sense of chaos and disorder with the new situation. What had anyone expected? When you gathered a collection of traumatized children and tossed them under a single roof and expected cooperation. Dorms were a new concept at UA, a model that few other schools adopted. The situation was entirely different, but the common problems of community living were present despite the rather impressive quirks. The floors and walls were reinforced, waterproof, fireproof, electricity retardant, coated with a non-reactive chemical to ward off various acids or bases, temperature adjustable and with climate controlling capabilities. The designers had thought nearly everything through. Adding in smaller touches were necessary and even designing a fully stocked staff room for minor building repairs. Most of this was simply powdered cement for a certain pro hero, but there were additional supplies like cans of paint, adhesive glues and sealers, abrasive cloths for removing stains and soot, and a vacuum larger than a small child. The stairwells were slightly wider than normal. The railings double-welded and supported through the middle to absorb impressive weight. The elevators were heavy-duty, able to lift the equivalent of a small cargo box fully loaded for international waters. Additional call buttons supplied for a various array of scenarios: fire, power outage, contact nearest campus authority, immediate medical attention required, sanitary contamination, perceived threat. From the windows that lined the courtyard, large floor-to-ceiling windows that were thicker than All Might's thigh, you could see the two picnic tables that lined the private garden for the dorm building. A few flower beds, an optional spot for a student garden, small decorations that fit with the decor of UA. The first floor was sprawling, large open areas that everyone could tell had a strategic advantage to it. A single TV that was relatively large, a few couches and chairs and a horseshoe with matching coffee tables and lamps. A rug that still smelled like the manufacturer's plant. It too was likely fireproof. The kitchen was large, wide counters and islands surrounded with backless bar stools. It was equipped fully with pots and pans, the most basic utensils and standard cutlery. The fridge was large, clearly an industrial kitchen fridge and freezer combo. It was perfect, it was utopia, except it wasn't. A house had a lifetime of adaptation, of minor remedies so common or natural people forgot about them to begin with. A new room, clearly, did not have these accommodations. The learning period took some time, small subtle mistakes that anyone could make. Mina slipped up first, stretching jerkily before rolling sideways and smashing face first into a wall. Kaminari messed up next, sprawled on one of the communal couches. He rolled off, trying to twist quickly to catch himself on his feet in a well-practiced movement that spoke years of slacking off. Instead, his shins slammed into a coffee table and the blonde-haired male collapsed to the ground wheezing. Takoyami kept pulling on push doors. Uraraka couldn't get the small metal key to work in her door. Sero walked into a wall around 4 times, and Kirishima busted out the corner drywall from running his shoulder into it too many times. The entry mat skid out of control under Hagakir's feet when she ran inside too quickly. Momo fell clean off the back of a bar stool when she forgot they had no backs. Midoriya one morning forgot his ID to get back into the dorms. He spent 10 minutes blinking and dumb exhausted incomprehension on the locked door. Most of the mistakes were minor things, small adjustments everyone teased the others over. Homesickness reared its ugly head. Classwork and assignments built up until stress overwhelmed everything else. Then, the requests started to come in. The UA campus security mandated that for a student to leave campus, they must put in an accurate form to their homeroom teacher, then be monitored for any suspicious activity or threat. It was a completely understandable security risk, one that nobody could really complain over. All food was provided for them, unlimited access to school facilities. They had a 5-minute walk to anything they could want, but sometimes, not being able to run into town for something truly was the worst. Kaminari had the first casualty. His phone charger finally died, crying out its pain before sparking feebly and passing away. The cord broke where it plugged into the phone, exposed bits of metal that even an expert mechanic couldn't fix. Tsuyu ran out of soap. Considering her baths were more like long leisure soaks in a pool, she really should have brought extra. Midoriya ran out of pencils, all of the poor things warped from absent-minded chewing or sharpened to such a short length it was completely useless. The first true accident was Mina. "Guys, stop," Mina moaned, face first laying down on her bed. It was on a noticeable slant, a good 4 inches of uneven difference. "This isn't funny." That didn't do much to deter the hysterical laughter from both Kirishima and Kaminari. "Dude," Sero could barely wheeze out from how strong he was shaking, "you melted your bed." Mina rolled over and screamed into her pillow. Kaminari could barely breathe. His words already were slurred behind the shaking of his chest. It's only 4 inches. Mina screamed again, and Kirishima finally composed himself, wiping aside the tears from the corner of his eyes. It's not too bad. He grinned, flushed in amusement. You could maybe go steal books from Mr. Class Prees. Yeah, get a couple dictionaries and it'll be fixed, Sero added in, dropping to his knees to squint at the damage up closer. You really destroyed this thing, didn't you? Mina popped her head up, huffing and scowling. It wasn't like I did it on purpose. Sometimes when I'm sleeping it just happens. Kirishima nodded knowingly. Oh yeah, that's the worst. Oh, yikes. Sero grimaced with a shrug. Sometimes my quirk acts up, but it's probably nothing like you guys. Kaminari shrugged and scratched the nape of his neck. I don't ever have that problem. Probably because your quirk is electric, you idiot. Oh, hey. Okay, so. Kaminari paused, squinting at the couch suspiciously. I can't think of anyone that could do this. Mina paused, then cackled far too loudly. The couches, once plush and soft red LTHR, were now destroyed beyond repair. Strips hung loosely. High-quality stuffing was falling out in clumps. Large gouges tore up any areas relatively unscratched, leaving it looking fairly mangled. Kaminari scratched the underside of his chin. Do we have a resident dog as well, instead of just a rabbit? Mina wheezed, slapping the back of the destroyed LTHR furniture. She looked close to keeling over. I dunno, man. Sero looked at the mess fairly apprehensively. I don't think a bit of tape is going to fix it this time. Kirishima made a small noise of misery, glancing at the decent length of adhesive in his hands. Are you sure? Sero shrugged. I can try. What did you even do to this thing? Kirishima flushed, looking around anxiously. There was one of those ghost hunting TV shows on. Mina popped her head up, looking far too delightful. Did you get spooked? Kaminari beamed. Pun. That was a pun. I can't help it. That's freaky. You got scared from BuzzFeed Unsolved? Oh my god. I did not. Kirishima defended, waving his arms around somewhat desperately. A small sliver of red LTHR was stuck to the outer edge of his elbow, testament to his accidental quirk use. Rest in pieces, couch. Mina snickered, patting the back of the chair with a far too delighted expression. You better figure out how to fix this before Aizawa finds out and we all get detention. Kaminari flinched and shook his head. Oh god. No, Kirishima squawked. We can fix this. If Uraraka could fix the kitchen without Aizawa finding out, we can fix this. Sero scratched the back of his neck. Didn't she have Midoriya help her though? And Momo made that glue for her. Mina tilted her head with a hum. I've sewed a little. They don't make clothes in the pattern I like, so I've made skirts before. I don't have any needles though. Sero looked at the couch and hummed in thought. I can probably tape this together. Kaminari poked a lump of stuffing with an amused sound. Yeah man, it's not like you ate the stuffing or anything, bro. It's all here, just outside instead of inside. I bet you we could gut a pillow or something for extra stuffing. Mina chirped in excitedly. This is going to be fun. Let's get to work. Ida tore up the carpet on the end of the hallway, right in front of the elevator. Decelerating too quickly destroyed the fibers like rug burn in reverse. The flooring underneath was black and scorched. The hallway stank of melting plastic for days. They couldn't fix that one so easily. Not without gutting the entire hallway of carpeting and relaying it down. The ground was strong and crunchy where the plastic underwebbing melted together. The polyester strands fused into a gross black clump. Gyro jumped at it, sprawled on her belly wearing a thick visor and other tools that looked strangely like a mad scientist's lab. Nobody wondered why she had soldering tools and over 14 different types of tweezers. Jirio worked professionally, bobbing her head to aggressive punk music while she performed surgery on the floor. They ended up with a small doormat in the hallway, hiding the stain. At least it wasn't crunchy or unraveling anymore. Todoroki caught a cold. He sneezed and the sudden temperature shock of both ice and fire caused a window to explode in shards as large as rice. Everyone turned silent, looking at the large expanse of glass that now sprinkled across the floor. Todoroki sighed, hung his head, and quietly walked out of the room. Shoji opened a cabinet and casually tore the door off. He stared at it for a moment, attempting to gently place it back on its busted hinges. At this point, Momo was going to get a ridiculously expensive Christmas present. Kaminari picked a fight with the dryer. Apparently he took static shock as a personal offense. The dryer won. Ajiro dented the wall first, puncturing right through the drywall and leaving a powdery white hole. He ended up scrubbing the white powder out of his tail hair in the kitchen sink. Todoroki's door kept warping from temperature changes. There are only so many times you could muscle it back into shape before wood gave way. At least the hairline splintering was only obvious from the inside. Sero stuck tape to the wall and peeled it in the paint away in one fluid motion. Tsuyu somehow brought a light fixture down, although she never quite explained what she was doing. Midoriya broke the pavement outside. He had been lifting weights and was so startled by a spontaneous bird flying by. He tossed the weight over the balcony until it fell all the way down and cracked concrete. Takoyami broke the handle on the fire escape after he tripped on the first step and dark shadow snapped out and shattered the railing. All in all, everyone was scrambling in a strange sense of camaraderie as the dorm building around them very slowly fell apart. They pieced it together with strong work, elbow grease, and a lot of tape. They actually did a really good job with it all. There was only one oversight that very casually turned the entire dorm into a secret time bomb. It turned out that the washing machine lacked the proper chemical neutralizers to deconstruct nitroglycerin into a safer compound. Nitroglycerin was explosive, sure, but only when triggered by a spark or other physical contact. However, nitroglycerin changed over time. It became more unstable with age, changing from a clear oily fluid into something almost reddish in color. It released fumes in the air, highly flammable fumes, that stuck relatively low to the ground. Not only that, but the more unstable nitroglycerin got, the more likely it was to spontaneously combust from something as basic as friction. Since the students weren't permitted to leave campus to acquire the required chemicals to neutralize the problem, and Momo wasn't confident with creating a chemical agent without messing up a single molecule, one of the empty rooms was broken into and became the ticking bomb room. Nobody talked about the room, although everyone knew of its existence. Everyone knew that eventually someone would have to speak up and tell their teacher about the quickly increasing pile of live explosives. Until then, nobody was willing to mention it other than a terrified glance the moment a heavy workout left yet another t-shirt coated in nitroglycerin. Surely everything would come out one day, but it wasn't that day, and thus, the poorly kept secret became even more a secret. Kaminari was completely banned from the top floor of the building. Electricity and live explosives were under no circumstances to ever meet. Can we make mine to tell him? That way if they go investigate, at least the little pervert dies first. Oh my god, guys, we literally have a ticking time bomb. What if ... what if Todoroki froze it all? Freezing still creates friction, which would detonate it all. ... CRP. Midoriya broke down on the kitchen counter only a week into the poorly kept secret. At least he was sane enough to express how ridiculously stupid the problem was. Out of every single person in the dorm, the only people who could likely survive an explosion of that caliber was Kirishima and Bakugo. Maybe Midoriya if he had enough time to recover or activate full cowl. But other than that, everyone would likely be incinerated. But telling Aizawa, please, they would rather be dead than expelled. It was actually the students of 1B that blew the cover, or rather, that exposed that the students of the hero course were struggling with adapting to campus life. Aizawa showed up one weekend, bright and early when nobody in particular wanted to see him. Weekends were a unique thing since half of the students followed a schedule and the other half ignored exercise in favor of sleeping. It wasn't common to see one half of the class until nearly noon. On the other hand, Bakugo was almost always gone before dawn. Midoriya followed after. The other students ambled out at unpredictable times. 10 in the morning was a perfectly reasonable time to shake everyone out of their rooms, forcing them to gather in the main living room. Everyone very carefully did not look at the mauled couch. All right, Aizawa started, head lolling slightly to the side. His eyes were more bloodshot than normal. The bags under his eyes had reached a critical level of purple. Obviously, the man didn't want to waste his weekend on campus lecturing a bunch of students. It's come to staff attention that the accommodations here at the dorms may not have sufficed given your range of quirks. Nobody said anything. The various flaws in the building seemed obvious, bright and glaring in the early morning. The way the sunlight filtering through the repaired window was slightly dimmer than the others. The way the TV had a disfigured HD input and didn't actually work anymore. Nobody looked up, where a small circular hole remained of the light fixture they had to remove. Thank God Bakugo and Midoriya were out running. Otherwise one of them would have blown their cover instantly. Aizawa lazily looked over them all before he sighed and scratched his cheek. Look, I don't want to be here on my day off. The other dorms had the electrical system broken from scales in the drywall. Fess up, or everyone here is getting detention. Uraraka inhaled sharply. Momo looked horrified at the thought. Ida hung his head, nearly vibrating from the disappointed gaze of his teacher. Everyone tensed, ready to bolt the moment the class president very slowly raised his hand. Mina bit her lip. Minda was basically twitching in stress. Ashido melted her bed. Kaminari nearly screamed. The sudden volume caused nearly everyone to jump. Mina flushed, glaring and spitting out low insults as her hands curled into fists. Aizawa very slowly looked over at them, unfaltering gaze. Kaminari fumbled and fell mute. Right, Aizawa sighed into his scarf. I'll have support code a new bed frame to be resistant to your quirk. What else? Everyone blinked in a moment of stunned confusion, expecting punishment. Aizawa looked even more exhausted. We as staff failed to accommodate all of your quirks. It's realistic to expect damages due to our oversight. If none of these damages were intended, then they aren't your fault. Tsuyu blinked and lifted her hand blandly. She didn't look cowed or startled at all. I broke a light ribbit. I was trying to stretch my tongue, but we can't use quirks without supervision outside. Aizawa's eyes FLC curved upwards to the single hole in the ceiling drywall. You can stretch in the courtyard. Tsuyu blinked and gave a formal nod. It was impossible to see if she was happy with her new freedom. Sir, Uraraka started, face scrunched up and flushed in her embarrassment. I messed up the kitchen island and dropped it. But Momo and I tried to fix it and it isn't that bad anymore. She kept her eyes scrunched closed, clearly expecting something horrible for her damages. Aizawa sighed and ran one hand down his face, tugging on his skin and distorting his lower lip. How? I fell asleep studying. Uraraka's lower lip was wobbling, tears gathering in the corner of her eyes. I'm sorry, I didn't realize my quirk activated until I woke up and released it. Aizawa exhaled through his nose. It whistled high-pitched. How? Aizawa paused, thinking through the wording better. How many of you have damages from accidental quirk activation? Ada's head hung in disappointment. He lifted one hand, keeping his head in a respectful bow. Slowly, Mina lifted her hand while chewing on her lower lip. Kirishima did too, looking just as uncomfortable as Kaminari, who was trying to not glance in the direction of the dryer. Takoyami sighed and joined the count. Right. Aizawa looked more tired than angry over the situation. And you tried to fix what you messed up. Sir, Momo interjected, looking ashamed but determined. Most of the repairs were minor. Shoji needed a new hinge for the cabinets. Takoyami needed help installing a new railing. We didn't want to bother you. Most of the repairs. Todoroki blasted out that window. Kirishima jerked a thumb over his shoulder, pointing at the floor-to-ceiling sheet of glass installed. It took a day for us to repair it. Momo did all the strong work. Aizawa's head snapped over to Todoroki, who was standing alone a little ways from the group. Clearly uncomfortable, he shuffled under the scrutiny before confessing bluntly, I sneezed. A list was drawn up, a series of repairs to be made to the building and various quirk accommodations that needed to be made. Mina was getting prescription gloves that were common for quirks with corrosive discharge or fluids. Apparently she had an old pair, but forgot them at her home and hadn't the ability to go get them. Uraraka was getting capped gloves, which were a bit more difficult to get, but the design was relatively the same for quirks with full finger activation. Blankets were written down for production, both with reinforced Kevlar weave and other fire-retardant materials. Todoroki's door and window frame would be replaced with aluminum, more resistant to temperature fluctuations and warping. Everything seemed reasonable. Industrial solvent for Sero's tape, supplies for drywall patching from Majiro's tail punching through. A new light fixture would be supplied and replaced. RBB mats provided at the entryway of all doors and elevators, both for Ada's engines and Kaminari's static. Cementos would be around to fix the damaged sidewalk outside from where Midoriya smashed it with a weight. Apparently damages were worse over in the 1B dorm, so it would be a while still. The dryer was being removed and sent to the support course students, likely for spare parts. A new one would be brought in at the soonest time. Until then everyone would have to make do with air dry. Is there anything else? Aizawa asked, looking far more frustrated and irritable now that it was nearly noon. Nobody addressed the elephant in the room. The door opened and in stumbled Midoriya coated in dirt and mud, and a Bakugo. The latter scowled at the sight of everyone crowded around him. The sharp stench of burnt sugar followed him like a kitchen disaster. Aizawa-sensei. Midoriya scrambled in alarm, shuffling into a respectful bow. A glob of mud made from the thick sweat on the boy's face and the dust on his skin dripped off onto Aizawa's shoe. Wonderful, Aizawa deadpanned. What have you broken, problem child? Midoriya paled before he scrambled backwards, raising both hands defensively and stuttered out sentences impossible to comprehend. The speed of his stuttering increased until he was reaching a cadence most auctioneers strive for. It was inspirational to watch, truly. Bakugo CLCK at his tongue, leaning against the front door. His skin was SLCK with sweat, his hair wet and clumping near his scalp. His breathing was still heavy, eyes FLC curring around in suspicion. Aizawa-sensei is going to fix all the broken furniture. Ashido cheered in delight, clapping her hands together. Isn't that wonderful? Bakugo huffed a noise, shoving past Midoriya without a word. He mumbled to the kitchen, still in sight of everyone. Fishing out a glass for the tap, he pointed a thumb over his shoulder at the group, which unlucky bestiarity told him about the bomb. Kaminari hissed under his breath, and Sero put his hands over his face. Aizawa blinked calmly before his scarf started to levitate, eyes suspiciously red. Bomb. All of UA stood outside, held back by the thick fireproof flame-retardant rope. It wouldn't do much in an actual explosion, but it did help the few students who hadn't managed control over their quirks. It was printed with standard caution. All across the length, the bright red and blue lights flashed, the piercing wailing of sirens cut off only half an hour ago. The low mumbling of the entire UA staff and students was a painful whisper that punched against Aizawa's temple like a cinder block. He wished he could have stayed home. Why did he have to deal with this on his day off? Yo, his friend, present Mike in full costume, laughed, swooping onto the scene to lean heavily on his friend. Aizawa staggered under the unexpected weight, nearly crumpling. Not every day. You don't expel anyone after they make a bomb in the dorms. Aizawa hissed out a low noise of outright fury. Present Mike cackled, the noise amplified by the hero costume speaker around his throat. Aw, don't be like that. Give them points for creativity. This thing apparently could have taken out a quarter of the campus. You are not helping. You should be proud of their stealth, their skills, the fact they almost killed everyone and you needed to call a bomb squad to disarm a pile of dirty socks. Aizawa groaned, finally let himself be tackled to the ground, and cursed once again the horrible class of 1A. The dorm building provided one industrial fridge and 8 cupboards. An additional cupboard housed a tall stack of plates and glassware. A pull-out drawer provided pans and pots with other additional kitchen supplies like metal sheets and strainers. It was designed and supplied with something overstocked and trademarked. And although UA was attempted to fix its prior oversight with the dorm facilities, there were a few minor things they still hadn't expected. 8 cupboards were not enough for 20 students. They could assign 2 students per cupboard, but that didn't really take into account the individual wants and needs of each student. Sato got an entire cupboard dedicated only to himself. It was mostly full of various baking necessities and dried powders. He had taken up a large portion of the industrial fridge as well. Kirishima and Kaminari butted up. Everything powdered and health food went to the redhead and everything else went to Kaminari. Uraraka and Gyro teamed up instantly, squishing their claimed space to include Momo, who awkwardly supplied them with various boxes and cans whenever she pleased. Kota and Takoyami shared a cupboard, although that was a recent addition since Isui had apparently stored something that left Kota bawling and trembling all the way across the room. Nobody had the confidence to check what the frog had hidden behind the little cupboard door. Anjiro, Shoji, and Midoriya stored their things together. Almost everything they ate and snacked on was some array of health food or protein bars. They worked well together, nothing messy and pretty vague. Mina and Todoroki teamed up. The two-tone had a concerning amount of dried noodles on his side, while Mina had an array of neon bright packaging that was written in English across the label. It was stunning, the contrast of bland noodles and whatever oddities Mina somehow procured. Maybe that was why the two got along so well. Sero didn't have a cupboard, although he stole what he could from Kaminari. Minta didn't have anything, although everyone had done that rather purposefully. There was a single incident where the short boy had been hoarding green bananas. Thankfully, they were removed before Minta could ever use them in a grotesque fashion. Ayama didn't have a spot, nor Hagakure. Bakugo didn't lay claim to a cupboard, which maybe was the most alarming thing of them all. It was clear after the bomb incident that nobody wanted to bunk with the explosive teen. In biology classes, they always learned about the 4 different building blocks for life: proteins and lipids and carbohydrates and nucleic acids. Fatty foods had a lot of lipids, potatoes and rice had a lot of carbs. It was basic info they all knew, regurgitating it back up for a test. There were actually 26 essential vitamins and minerals, things that everyone needed in proper amounts to be healthy. A lot of times they could get what they needed from their diet. Sometimes there were supplements like that vitamin A stuff Mina chugged down the moment she felt a cold coming on. Quirks changed biology. It messed with everyone in new ways. It wasn't realistic to apply the same unit of measurement and daily intake averages to everyone. It was like using the old body mass index on everyone when there were people like Shoji out there, and people like Minta. It was old and impractical, but a lot of the students had grown up eating what they needed to the degree they didn't even realize when they didn't have it. The UA did a great job in the cafeteria. Lunch rush was hands down amazing. Having food in the dorms was something impossible to replace the ability to come down for a snack in the middle of study, or to settle a craving at 3 a.m. The staff had done a great job in allowing students to submit requests for food orders. Only so many things were fulfilled on the list, and only if it was something that seemed realistic. Kaminari tried writing down alcohol and ended up cleaning the main floor washroom for a week under a seething Aizawa. Some of the tiny things though, well, it wasn't their fault, they honestly completely forgot. Sero sprawled across the floor, groaning aimlessly as they squinted at the ceiling. He looked tired, small bags under his eyes. The grin he usually wore was strangely absent on his face. He looked exhausted. Dude, Kaminari stated, nudging the other boy with one sock-covered foot. Are you dead? Sero groaned again, throwing one arm over his eyes. Kaminari blinked and nudged him again, wiggling his toes this time against the other's side. Kaminari, Sero mumbled past his arm. Can you zap me unconscious so I die? Kaminari blinked twice. I mean, probably. But I get detention and I already have like 4. But I'm dying. I thought I was supposed to kill you. Oh crud, you're right. Sero squinted, lifting his arm a little to look at the equally squinting electric quirk user. Kaminari, this is CK. Kaminari shrugged and looked a little unsure. Do you want me to get you a juice pouch? I've got Hawaiian punch. It's like corn syrup and sugar. Sero's nose started to wiggle a little bit. Dude, I'm not going to lie. I've been craving carrots for days now. Kaminari grimaced and pulled back. Dude, that's horrible. I know. Sero moaned in frustration. It's the weirdest sit, man. I wanted carrots and ketchup. I don't even know why. Kaminari scratched the back of his neck. I mean, I kinda get it actually. I spotted Shoji chugging that gallon milk the other day. Sero's eyes bulged. No way. You mean the milk that Sato was beaching about? That went missing. Shoji chugged it all. Who can chug milk? Kaminari glanced around before he squatted instantly, nearly crawling over the floor to get to Sero's ear level. No, man, Kaminari hissed in a whisper. Sero flinched back, but was too curious about the level of Kaminari's excitement. I was up last night at 4 a.m. You know Hagakir's jar of that coconut sit. The stuff she smears everywhere and gets on the doorknobs. Sero winced because yes, he knew that. Coconut oil apparently was amazing in hair and on skin. Sero didn't do anything with it, although he did spot Mina and Uraraka slathering it on their arms after doing dishes on day. Hagakir did too, but it was too uncomfortable to watch. I saw Yaoyorozu yesterday. Kaminari's voice dropped even lower, eating it with a spoon. Sero's jaw dropped. No way. Yes way. Dude, it's straight slimy sit. I know. Kaminari's voice burst into volume again, leaving Sero flinching back. The door slammed open. Hagakir skipped and grabbed a glass and filled it with filtered tap water. Sero and Kaminari smiled weakly and tried desperately to not look at the jar of coconut oil. 7 a.m. Tsuyu walked into the kitchen with a rumbling stomach. Are you eating yeast? She blinked, startling Gyro so strong the girl fell off the chair she was suspiciously perched on. Gyro flushed, holding the glass of frothing brown slime with both hands. It was smelling suspiciously bread wine in the room, and almost all of the baking yeast packets had been savagely torn into and apparently drunk. Hi. Gyro struggled to recover, smiling wobbly. Tsuyu didn't even blink. Hello, she responded politely, walking to her single cupboard to open it carefully and pull out an opaque glass bottle. She opened it up, taking a seat next to Gyro at the kitchen table. Tsuyu fished out one of the clean pairs of chopsticks and fumbled around inside the opaque jar. So, Gyro's voice was heavily strained. Do I want to know what's in there? Tsuyu tilted her head and looked at her classmate curiously. I don't think you want to. I've been told it's incredibly uncomfortable, but I think other people would be uncomfortable with drinking yeast. Gyro blushed and fumbled with the glass in her hand. We didn't have any bread and I just... Tsuyu nodded knowingly. Sometimes our stomachs tell us what we need and it's a good idea to listen to them. Tsuyu fished out something small, dark brown, and not wiggling like Gyro feared. What is that? Gyro gaped, squinting at the small piece of meat. Is that beef? Why yes. Tsuyu smiled widely. I pickle beef liver over the summer. It helps sometimes because I gets colds otherwise. Gyro paled. Beef liver? Tsuyu looked back at the piece of meat in her chopsticks. I ran out of lamb liver earlier so I have to use this now. It's quite good. Would you like some? Gyro slid back, her chair scratching on the floor. And no, I'm good. I've got. She trailed off, lifting her glass of bubbling bread wagyu, you know. Yeast. Tsuyu nodded politely. Okay, I hope you sleep well. Enjoy your yeast. Gyro skittered off, and understood instantly why Koda fled from her cupboard. Takoyami had given Koda one of his spare cuttle bones. Apparently his rabbit's teeth were growing a bit too quickly since its supply of fresh hay ran out. Koda wasn't much of a talker, but even he was a bit unsettled when the cuttle bone looked gnawed on a little. Or why Takoyami even had cuttle bones to begin with. Kirishima crunched ice. It was a bit startling since his teeth were all very sharp and hooked, not at all suited for crunching and grinding. It was almost interesting actually how his teeth worked. All pointed like canine teeth but flattened and broad like incisors. Midoriya had gone on a rant once, mumbling obsessively under his breath, looking on the verge of shoving his hand into the poor redhead's mouth. Kirishima crunched ice like it was chocolate. In the morning, throughout the day, hell, Ashido could have sworn she spotted him take a bite out of Todoroki's slippery barricade. Was he always overheating? Did his teeth grow constantly and he needed to wear them down so they wouldn't hurt him? Nobody knew. Not even Kirishima. Bakugo chugged water. It was honestly quite concerning. More than once, someone had jokingly asked him if he had some sort of medical disorder nobody knew about. Quiet comments about kidney and renal damage. Bakugo of course flipped them off or cursed at them. The only time that Kirishima actually put in proper concern, Bakugo ended up shrieking and launching himself across the training field to smash the redhead into a tree. Then, everyone started paying attention. In class, Bakugo had a very normal thermos for morning tea or coffee depending on how tired he was. It was metal, a few dents along the bottom and a silicone grip that looked melted from use. Mina kept track, and watching in increasing awe as once that thermos was empty, it was quickly replaced with a bottle of water. then another bottle of a sports energy drink. The water bottle was filled up from the fountain and finished before lunch. At lunch, Bakugo would drink a much larger traveling water bottle that was quite standard for hiking. Guys, Mina whispered, sliding her careful calculations of fluid quantity to Sero and Kaminari. I think Bakugo's kidneys are immortal. It wasn't even a large concern truly. It was more of a joke that they were all following because it was something easier to conspire over rather than doing actual homework. Sero increased the stakes, convincing Kirishima to join in and keep a careful eye on Bakugo's washroom breaks. It started as a joke, and then it wasn't. Guys, I'm not joking. Kirishima deadpanned with a vaguely terrified look. The dude used the washroom twice today. Kaminari dropped the textbook he had been holding. Mina gaped for a second before her strangled inhale sounded like someone playing the recorder. Are you sure? Sero almost whimpered out. He couldn't have just gone twice. He drank Minta's body weight today. Mina whispered in a pitch so high it nearly made their ears ring. Where does it go? Maybe he's part camel. Kaminari whispered with wide eyes. Are people like that? Are there actual camelback people? Sero frowned and thought. No, I've seen him shirtless. There's no hump. Are you sure there's no hump? Mina stressed again Kirishima. You've stared at him the most. Where is the hump? What? Kirishima shrieked, face blushing bright red. I do not stare at him. Where is the hump? Kaminari muttered under his breath with a humor gleam in his eye. Kirishima, where is the hump? There is no hump, Kirishima argued, although the fact he looked ready to bolt wasn't helping the situation. There's only one thing we can do to make sure. Mina's eyes glowed as her grin became something sharp. We need to smack him. They drew straws to determine who would be smacking in what vicinity. The logic made sense. If there was a single spot where the water was bubbling up, it would probably squish under a heavy impact, like hitting a water oon. Kirishima was pretty skeptic. He had seen Bakugo without a shirt numerous times and he seemed to have the proper muscle structure. Sure, his pecs were particularly large, but Kirishima had just assumed the other had an insane workout routine. Nobody had seen inside the feared bedroom yet. The closest they all got was the empty room they all deemed the bomb room when the dirty laundry became an exploding problem. Maybe he did hide water in his muscles. The size of his deltoids were already ridiculous. Okay, great. Ashido cheered happily, looking down at the large piece of paper that detailed their pretty bad plan. I call the shoulders. Kaminari winced as he looked at his assigned area for slapping Bakugo's pecs themselves. Are you sure this is a good idea? Sero scratched his chin in thought as he looked at his assigned area Bakugo's quads. I mean, what are we supposed to do with this knowledge after we find out? Ashido CLC her tongue disapprovingly. That doesn't matter. This is a mystery. Kirishima winced as he looked at his own designated area, the biceps and forearms. Ashido, I really can't see this ending well. Ashido did a great job herself actually. She leapt off the top of a desk, seeming more reminiscent of their frog classmate than an acid user. She vaulted in the air, landing on Bakugo's back with both arms slung over his shoulders. Hi, Ashido cheered, pulling up her knees to awkwardly fold against Bakugo's spine. Her entire movement was so fluid and unexpected, it took a few seconds before the blonde clued in. What the FCK? Bakugo roared, twisting and shifting and whoa. Okay, there was nothing squishy on the planes of his back. Mina was launched off like a poor rodeo clown, and felt dazed before she even hit the ground. Kaminari rushed to her aid, although Mina knew she hadn't been thrown as strong as she could have been. Oh my god, Mina wheezed out, accepting the helpful arm to bring her to her feet. I can die happy now. Kaminari looked even more startled. Sero went for the attack, rushing and vaulting off the teen's legs before he could get hit. It was a training practice, so all eyes were on them. Sero, of course, was roasted in record time, but 3 pairs of watchful eyes noticed that those thick thighs didn't shift in the slightest. In fact, nothing did. I'm going for it, Kaminari whispered to Kirishima, gulping loudly. Hey man, Kaminari cheered as Bakugo strode off the training field. Wow, how had Kaminari never realized before that Bakugo was absolutely terrifying? Great job out there, Kaminari continued with a wide grin, hoping it would hide his anxiety. He pulled his hand back subtly, going for a high five. He missed, leant afar, and the unexpected full THWMP of his hand landing spread out directly on Bakugo's chest. He could feel the heavy, steady pulse of a heart likely the size of an avocado. Kaminari could feel the sweat that was slowly sliding down his temple, and he could feel the overwhelming warmth exuding from the muscle under his palm. Kaminari didn't breathe, but he very easily heard the rattling snap of a neck cracking twice. Kaminari closed his eyes, accepted his fate, and waited for the impending explosion. Kirishima interrupted, grabbing Bakugo's arm to try and tug it back from where he was ready to commit murder. I'll kill you, Bakugo screamed, lunging forward as Kirishima forced him back, clumsily kicking Kaminari in the side to knock him aside. Whoa man, Kirishima uncomfortably yanked, trying to push the opposing force away. Come on bro. Don't do this, Bakugo screeched, lunging forward although Kirishima braced himself. The impact still made his breath whoosh out of him, leaving him gasping slightly as the blonde continued to squirm. "Come back here, coward," Bakugo screeched, arms flailing over Kirishima's shoulder as explosions detonated continuously. The smell of something burning and melting made Kirishima's head spin. He couldn't hear anything from how close the concussive blasts were to his face. Bakugo flailed, twisted, and his elbow managed a perfect strike against Kirishima's unhardened nose. It crunched like a burnt cookie, and Kirishima dropped. "Oh sit," Kaminari gaped, scrambling to sprint away as Bakugo took off in hot pursuit. Mina and Sero sprinted back, dropping to Kirishima's side. "Oh man," Sero breathed in awe, "it's not broken." "I don't know how," Mina confessed, hands frantically flying around the plethora of snot drooling out of Kirishima's throbbing nose. "That was one wicked hit." "It's okay," Kirishima wheezed out, barely able to breathe. "His arms aren't squishy though." Sero whooped in victory at one more successful smack. In the distance, Kaminari screamed for mercy. It was a quiet, solemn silence as Sero stared at his straw, noticeably shorter than the rest. "I am so sorry," Kirishima whispered quietly. Head hung in mourning. Kaminari nodded sympathetically, eyeing his closet where he knew a recorder was stashed. He would have played a funeral march if it wasn't for the fact Mina would easily destroy his instrument. Guys, please," Sero begged, smile gone with horror-struck tremble instead. "Guys, please." "You pulled the shorter straw," Mina argued, although all three of them had started to scooch away as if Sero was somehow contagious. Sero looked at the shorter straw in his hand once more in horror. I can't do this," Sero whimpered out. "Guys, he'll kill me." "Zap him," Mina instantly advised, although she knew it was useless. Sero looked at the straw in his hand in silent dejection. "Can I get someone to help me?" "Do it during class, that way Aizawa can drag Bakugo off of you," Kirishima advised with a wince. "Or maybe we could throw Minta at him." "Nah, even Minta wouldn't dare." Kaminari instantly shot the idea down. "Maybe if you bribed Hagakure. If you do it right in the morning he won't make as big an explosion." Mina offered timidly. It's been an honor flying with you." Kaminari, Kirishima, and Mina all lifted their arms in a single salute. Sero looked at his straw and whimpered once more. It was a boring morning, casual. Everyone was filling in slowly, some more bright-eyed than others. Aizawa was shuffling in slowly ahead of schedule, setting up the stack of quizzes he needed to pass back. They would be going over a new lesson, assigning a new assignment that would be collected in a few days. Ito arrived to class first, followed by Yaoyorozu, who had a nice metal thermos filled with fragrant tea. After the two early birds, the rest of the class began to filter in. The groups of students began to stick to one another, clumping into a mass of casual conversation. There was something odd, something new. He wouldn't have noticed it if it weren't for how there were a few anxious looks being tossed around. Midoriya in particular was looking more anxious, but more situational anxiety than any cause in particular. He kept glancing over at Bakugo, who had his eyes closed and feet propped up on his desk. He looked peaceful, not at all aware of the various glances being thrown at him. That meant something was going to happen. Oh dear. Aizawa sighed quietly and settled himself for the imminent confrontation, although he wasn't exactly sure what would be occurring. "Hey Bakubro," Kirishima cheered, practically throwing himself over Bakugo's desk. This forced the blonde's eyes open as his feet slid off the available space and thudded onto the floor. "Hey," Bakugo roared, not quite his usual fire just yet. He looked more startled than anything, quickly being replaced by annoyance. "What do you want, city hair? And get off my desk." Kirishima kept grinning, but it was wobbling on the edges. "Minta said you're the ugliest guy in class," Ashido shouted from where she was perched on the next closest desk, Sero's. Bakugo's eyes instantly flitted to the side, where Minta was walking into the room completely unaware. The entire room shuddered into a tense pause. "What?" Bakugo hissed out, standing with impressive power considering he wasn't the tallest in the class. Shoji and Takoyami took one step backwards, clearing the path to the small class member. "Kakan, wait," Midoriya yelped, leaping across the room. He had been far too ready for it, but he still looked as alarmed and as confused by the announcement as everyone else. "I'm sure it wasn't. What did you say about me, you purple FC quit?" Bakugo took 2 steps forward. Uraraka gave a small eep from her seat. Even Ida looked uncertain how to intervene. "That's enough." Aizawa started to drawl, Quirk ready to go the moment sparks started flying. Minta started blubbering nonsense, paling although he clearly had no idea what he had done to incur the blonde's wrath. Sero, silent through the entire proceedings, stepped slightly to the side out of Bakugo's side. Sero inhaled, squeezed his eyes closed and punched. No, it was a slap. Aizawa was groaning and lowering his head into his hands before the rest of the room realized what was going on. Bakugo paused, seeming to compose himself into a calm, cold monotone. "Did you just smack my butt?" Sero's jaw was chattering. The room was dead silent. Bakugo turned very, very slowly. "I'm going to kick your butt so strong," Bakugo responded far too calmly, "that your elbows are going to be shooting out your intestines." "That's fair," Aizawa thought to himself. He waited 4 seconds, even as the chaos started, before he lifted his head and intervened. If it took all of Shoji, Midoriya, Kaminari, and Kirishima to restrain Bakugo from committing manslaughter, so be it. The next staff meeting, he was demanding a raise. All right, so. Aizawa rubbed his face. You have been instigating physical altercations with Bakugo for the past 2 days because you are convinced, and I quote, he has a water hump. The class was silent, watching judgingly as Mina, Kaminari, Kirishima, and Sero nodded slowly. Aizawa exhaled through his nose slowly. And you are convinced of this due to the excessive quantities of water he drinks, and you have been slapping him to find his camel hump. It's called being hydrated, UFC nuggets. Bakugo spat out, looking like a highly irritable cat. Bro, it is not normal. Kirishima leapt in. You drink more water than a horse, and you PSS only twice. Have you been stalking me? Bakugo nearly shrieked, face red from fury, into the goddamn washroom. Aizawa inhaled and exhaled. Okay, shut up, he barked. The class obediently fell into silence. I thought this would have come up in your biology classes, but obviously some of us don't remember. Human bodies are vastly different due to the presentation of different quirks. Various nutritional and dietary needs are affected. Yeah, UFC quits. Bakugo hissed out quieter, although his was still plenty loud. I sweat FC King nitroglycerin. The 3 students stared at him blankly. Momo raised her hand uncomfortably, looking fairly unsure. Aizawa gave her a nod, and she stood. She looked more confident the moment she was at attention, glancing around at all the faces below them. I was wondering if it would be at all possible to request specific things for the dorm kitchen. I noticed that everyone has a unique dietary requirement. And although Lunch Rush does a wonderful job, I think we may be missing some of the supplements we would have normally. Aizawa scratched his face. Of course we forgot about vitamins. Momo's face twitched ever so slightly into a sheepish expression. It has been inconvenient sometimes with how our quirks operate. Wait, is that why you ate all the coconut oil? Kaminari blurted. Almost on cue, Uraraka and Hagakure inhaled sharply and spun around to glare at her in outrage. Momo, Hagakure shrieked in disbelief. I need that for my skin. She does have a point, Ribbit, Tsuyu mentioned with a slow nod. I have been running out of beef liver and it would be nice to get more. Minta paled and slowly slid even further away in his chair. I have been resorting to my spare cuddle bones, and acquiring proper alternatives would be appreciated. Takoyami agreed. Cuddle bones, Sito whispered. Takoyami blinked blankly. Yes, he agreed flatly. It keeps my beak trimmed. Mina looked ready to melt into the floor like her own acid. It's not just a few of us, sir. Tsuyu continued smoothly again. Gyro was eating yeast. What the FCK gyro? Yeast, is that where it all went? And I think Kirishima has been needing more iron. Ribbit. She blinked slowly. He's been eating ice and it's making Todoroki uncomfortable. Everyone looked at Todoroki, who barely blinked in response. Aizawa nodded slowly as he took everything in. Right, I'll pass this concern along. I believe that this requires a further look into Recovery Girl's private records. I am mandating that each of you are to visit her sometime this week to best determine supplementary nutritional needs or medical devices related to quirk use. It is apparent that we have overlooked various components of our students and we hope to fix this. Nobody in the class spoke beyond the small uncomfortable agreement. Great, Aizawa deadpanned. Open your books or get out. What do you get if you grab a sur of teenagers and throw them into one building with limited supervision? They had passed the phase of random destruction of various appliances or walls. They just passed the point of poor diet, junk food, and someone needing medical assistance because it was impossible to survive off tap water and instant noodles. Kaminari almost did it though, out of pure spite. It should have been some sort of act of faith, that they revealed their traumatic backstory over one quiet evening as the rain poured down around them. Or maybe over a sad movie they conveniently paused at the right moment. They would totally bond and become a supportive family of utter strangers with no comprehension of real-world social interaction. Of course that didn't happen. It happened in a series of poorly thought-out ideas. But considering the majority of students tended to make poor decisions anyways, it didn't seem that idiotic. The Floor is Lava was an excellent game which allowed no mercy. All individuals for themselves. Ashido threw herself at Kirishima, attempting to scale his back like a tree, completely forgetting that Ashido couldn't normally scale trees anyway, let alone a startled classmate. Kirishima yelped, his quirk activating in his surprise. Ashido squealed, falling off from the middle of his back to the ground in a rather dramatic display. Sero felt like a funeral march should be playing for Ashido's porcupine-looking face. Takoyami joined in without hesitation. The moment someone shouted the dreaded sentence, the quirk user summoned Dark Shadow to grab onto the reinforced light fixture and yank the teen into a hovering position. Asui flung herself at a wall, sticking to it like her namesake. The fact it was glass added to the surrealness of the situation. Gyro acted like a normal person, throwing a pillow onto the floor before hopping onto it. Momo made a pillow before she stood on it daintily, giggling behind a wide grin. During one eventful match, Sero and Sato combined forces to create a single length of strong tape from the couches to the kitchen. Ashido crawled carefully, securing snacks to her back as she inched herself all the way back from her sloth crawl. Kirishima and Kaminari cheered so loudly, Asui crawled her way downstairs to investigate. Bakugo didn't normally join in, but one day when Shoji shouted out the floor is lava. During training, Bakugo responded with a roar. Not today, FCK munches, he screamed, palms exploding to blast him high in the sky. Koda jumped onto Shoji's back. Shoji grabbed a nearby tree. Uraraka giggled and simply levitated herself and Midoriya. Ida leapt to stand on the jacket he hastily folded and set on the floor. Aizawa sighed, then used his capture weapon to casually yank him into the sky. Minta, the poor loser of that match, was left to run 10 laps for his failure. It became almost like training after a while. Present Mike found it absolutely hilarious, or at least All Might said that he had said so in the teacher's lounge. From then on out, whenever Aizawa was busy or unable to get to training classes and someone else took control of his time, they would spontaneously shriek the warning, and of course, everyone had to incorporate it somehow into whatever training they were doing. Was it frustrating when they were working on weightlifting and Shoji nearly hurled a 40 PND boulder in Midoriya's face's direction? Yes, it was very frustrating. But then again, the floor was lava and nobody wanted to burn when Midnight enforced that do not touch the ground policy with casually knocking anyone unconscious. Todoroki was a lucky BSTRD who could simply step on a conjured stool of ice and watched in mild disinterest as everyone else turned into shrieking maniacs. It was a jungle, and nobody was safe. In fact, Todoroki was very, very good at the game. He was almost the champ, if they were keeping score. Todoroki was very quick, very quiet, and very unnerving. Hell, even Takoyami was unsettled by the quiet boy. It wasn't his blunt phrasing which sometimes traveled even Tsuyu for how awkward it was, or the way he showed up then casually smacked everyone down without trying. There was a sense of vacancy in his eyes, like he was operating on an entirely different frequency than everyone else. Maybe it was just a personal thing, but Todoroki slipped away often and hid away out of sight. In his room, outside, long walks or private baths. It was difficult to have time with him. Todoroki was smart, but he didn't have the intent drive for academic performance like Momo and he didn't stress that much, or maybe he didn't visibly show that stress. Regardless, Todoroki was an ally in high demand since he was the undisputed god at facing lava flooring. He also was very strange on normal flooring. Todoroki walked like a cat, quiet and looming around corners before advancing into a room. He peered around with wide eyes, tilting his head even so his ear and temple would pass a corner before any other part of his face, the less distance to his eye due to the shape of a human skull. Minta imagined that sort of quiet prowling could mean nothing good at all. Todoroki also very cautiously sat, right on the corner of his seat, ready to pounce like a predator. Kirishima blinked, noticing how Todoroki was barely sitting on the stool at all. Okay man. Todoroki blinked, then realized after a long uncomfortable pause he was expected to respond. Yes, he confirmed bluntly, very little inflection in his voice. Kirishima backed away and left the kitchen very quickly. It wasn't worth it for that level of weirdness. Todoroki also always waited a few seconds before walking, pausing in doorways or near the base of the stairs before he managed to ascend. Nobody really knew why, but after a half-dozen close calls, everyone knew to wait for his strange little obsessive habit then follow behind. Was it annoying as hell when they were running late? Come on Todoroki, move. Sure. Did anyone actually bring it to attention? No. Asui ate sheep liver Kirishima used to munch on the dude's Quirk daily. Gyro had stolen all of Sato's yeast before she ran off literally sprinting. Nobody really even cared anymore. Todoroki also was very, very fond of grippy socks. Oh, they totally teased him for it for the first while. Seeing a blank-faced rock of a person wearing fluffy spa socks with adhesive silicone on the bottom for grip, Bakugo laughed so strong he choked on his spit and spent half an hour coughing just to survive. Did Todoroki's face change at all throughout it? Of course not. He just kept on walking with his fluffy white socks with red polka dots sticking away on the flooring as he zeroed in on that single juice pouch sitting out for him. Kirishima imagined Todoroki must have some very soft toes. Maybe he needed some sort of aloe that the socks sometimes came with. Maybe he had eczema or something. Maybe he just liked fluffy socks. Could Kirishima judge? He wore Crocs which, Kaminari told him daily, was not a good fashion choice. Did Kirishima care? No, he loved Todoroki's fluffy socks, manly as hell. Hagakure even joined by cooing about it to Momo, who under some heavy bribery in the shape of convenience store fudge, created 2 pairs of similar socks, dark brown with thin ridges of silicone instead of the cat toe bean design of Todoroki's. Hagakure walked around a happy individual, completely invisible except for fluffy socks. Uraraka joined in. Then suddenly half of the class was wearing fluffy silicone-patched socks as they padded around the tower. Did anyone understand it? Oh hell no. Did Aizawa receive a pair in his faculty mailbox? Oh hell yes. Did he wear them? The world would never know. Todoroki didn't care. Todoroki had enough cares in the world to fill a shot glass. He seemed like the only person in the world who could face down a rampaging bull and tell it to stop, and it would. Todoroki could face the gates of hell and ask them if they would like to donate some cans to a fundraiser he was running for something stupid. Hell, Satan would probably give him some cleaned out cans of ravioli. He was just that kind of person. Todoroki napped very softly, jolting awake at the easiest noises. He napped like a kitten. He slept in a few public areas, but only during the day. Sometimes at odd times, but nothing really weird. It wasn't like he was nocturnal. He just seemed like a cool dude who took advantage of comfortable couches in the common room. Sometimes at lunch he snuck away and took naps under some trees in the shade, relaxing until someone came close, then he'd startle awake and head to class. It seemed like a good idea. Maybe his quirk took a lot out of him. He napped in public areas with them when it was movie night or when the girls were doing things nearby. He would watch quietly when Bakugo took over the entire kitchen and created a messy, delicious disaster. Sometimes, if they were lucky, Bakugo would even share. Todoroki was odd. He didn't really clue into a few things either. He was sheltered, everyone knew that. Some popular references he didn't understand. Sometimes he stared blankly at his laptop and looked uncomprehendingly at data points he was expected to graph. That made some sense. It would be weird for the number one hero to teach his son to use spreadsheets. It was unfair that for some godforsaken reason, Takoyami was an outright MSDR at anything statistical or spreadsheet-based. Completely unfair. Todoroki didn't know what instant noodles were, yet he loved cold soba. He would go to ridiculous lengths for cold soba. He would eat his soul for a bowl of cold soba. Todoroki was also a hoarder. How? Nobody knew. Where? Nobody knew. His room was rearranged into open floor plan. He didn't even have a standing bed. He lived off pain and stiff muscles, and nobody even understood. Todoroki stole food like a little bicolored mouse and hid it somewhere completely impossible to find. It was simply gone. But Ajiro saw him leave with an arm full of instant noodles, and they never returned. Todoroki was become a sensation in the Wana dorms. Ashido and Sero were outright planning to rig up a net to catch him in the act, luring him with tasty instant noodles. Ida took a stop to it instantly, ending up captured instead. Todoroki ignored them and instead went to a couch to silently join the commentary for whatever home renovation show was on. Sato got surprisingly invested in it. Bakugo came back from a morning run earlier than expected and watched in muted fascination as Todoroki obliterated the single kettle they all own. Normally the blonde teen would have screamed over the only source of hot water they had. But there was something in the way Todoroki wasn't even paying attention that said something. The kettle warped, curling in on itself from the temperature difference of both fire and ice. Soot accumulated, metal crumpled and split like wet tissue paper. Todoroki very calmly placed it on the ground, then began stomping the ever-loving life out of the poor kettle. Bakugo watched, silently, contemplating if he should intervene and offer to blow it up. He didn't know what the kettle had done to Todoroki, but he was, in Bakugo's own words, beating the ever-loving sit out of the poor FC cur. Todoroki was very peculiar too. He was good at throwing himself on furniture, across it, on it, even sliding over it. Considering whenever they shouted that the floor was going to instantly burn them all, he always just created a shell of ice to stand on. The teen was amazingly good at leaping onto couches when he thought nobody was looking. Maybe he used it to train his depth perception since he generally leapt around quite a bit in battle. It was really odd. Midoriya tried to get him to come out of his shell a bit more, although Todoroki never really did. He interacted with them, sure, but he never really was there. It was like talking to a computer that had a set amount of responses. You could have a conversation, but after a while it would just stare at you blankly, unable to think. So, generally Todoroki just chilled in the background and ignored everyone else. Movie nights were great for that. He radiated heat like a personal fireplace, and everyone always huddled around him whenever they could. He also sat on the arm of the couch, perched in the most uncomfortable-looking position unsparingly. It made Bakugo bristle just staring at him. The movie was reaching its crescendo of slapstick comedy, the characters now exchanging obviously staged slapping on screen. It was dull enough that it didn't hurt anyone's brain, but amusing enough nobody could complain. The door to the dorms slammed open, smacking against the back door stopper with a rattling noise. "I am here," a loud noise announced. Midoriya perked up, the others ignored it. The loud, boisterous male voice was a wordless shout amidst the poorly timed laugh track. Todoroki, though, he rolled. He literally rolled, twisting his body to flip sideways off the armchair into the convenient little crevice between the front of the couch and coffee table. It was small, tucked away, and currently occupied by Uraraka. Uraraka screeched at the sudden weight, knocking sideways to flop on the carpet. Todoroki's breath whooshed out of him in a small noise. Beyond that, he didn't make a noise. In fact, if you hadn't been looking, he would have simply vanished. Ayama made a particular noise that nobody could translate. Ajiro peered over, tail twisting slightly when he noticed the one teen had vanished. Todoroki, Uraraka squealed, squirming to try and free herself from the small gap where the two had literally gotten stuck. You can get up now. Heavy footsteps as All Might walked closer, still in a thick muscular form, mostly because of his dramatic entrance. Todoroki stiffened. Uraraka froze, more out of surprise by the way his dense body completely locked up. Todoroki, Uraraka squeaked out in alarm. Midoriya peeked over the coffee table curiously. Are you okay? Did you hiccup and fall off? It was impossible to simply fall into that gap. He clearly dove, although nobody knew why. Yes, Todoroki admitted bluntly, wriggling himself up easily from the small crevice. His face didn't change in the slightest. I fell. All Might finally deflated, looking perplexed by the odd movement. Bakugo frowned, muttering something that Kirishima argued almost immediately. Todoroki padded off, unfazed and completely silent. Right, Uraraka squeaked, still lodged in the gap. Can someone help me up? Todoroki was weird with doors, just a small thing that Jiro found interesting. He had a specific way to open and close doors with handles. A small interesting thing he did. This is how he'd start. He'd twist the door handle freakishly fast, but then freeze. Then he'd place his other hand on the door too, before he yanked the door open freakishly fast. Once again, he'd freeze with the door now open. Then he'd step across to the other side, turn around, and repeat the weird sudden start and sudden stop to close the door. It took a long period of time, but he did it a lot. Ashido woke up crankily, desperately thirsty and itching for something to eat. Normally she wouldn't be so hungry, but she hadn't snacked before going to bed in favor of finishing her homework. She was paying the price now, and by that she meant that Kaminari was actually going to be paying the price of all of his orange juice she was about to drink. She hopped out of bed, grumbly and annoyed but thankful for the tendy grippy socks that Momo made for all of them. Honestly, they were the best decision they had ever had. Ashido walked her way to the staircase, figuring that a little acid on the now acid-repellent stairwell wouldn't be that annoying. It would all evaporate anyways by morning. She hopped on the railing, yawning and sliding her way all the way down to the ground floor. She stuck her landing thanks to the grippy socks, barely making a noise. Ashido thought to herself as she looked at the stairwell. I didn't make a sound. I'll have to try that in class sometime. She made her way to the main door from the stairwell, sliding through the recently oiled door contently. The kitchen lights weren't on, but she could see something. A dull blue glow that illuminated the area ever so slightly. Ashido frowned and tiptoed closer, curious who was awake so early in the morning. Maybe Tokoyami. He seemed like an early riser, and not only for the early bird gets the worm joke. She peered around, squinting and spotting a single person standing in the light of the fridge, blocking most of the light actually, leaving the rest of the room pretty dim. Ashido squinted, then caught sight of red hair. That's not Kirishima, Ashido thought to herself distantly. More importantly, she watched as Todoroki very obviously was chugging orange juice she had snuck down to steal. He was stealing her juice, which she was going to steal. She almost argued. To make matters worse, he wasn't even using a cup. He was chugging straight from the carton with huge, desperate gulps, not spilling a drop. Partially impressive, partially disgusting. Todoroki then hastily closed the fridge, reaching out with one foot to keep the door open ever so slightly for light. Then he flipped on the tap to the barest stream, sticking the open juice carton under the stream so fast there wasn't a noise in between. Ashido watched in dumb wordless shock as Todoroki filled the juice he drank with water, swirled it to disperse it, then snuck it back in the fridge in record speed. Ashido doubted she would have even noticed watered-down orange juice. Todoroki slunk low, staying low to the ground as he walked silently past her to the stairwell on the opposite side leading to the boys' dorms. He didn't lift himself from a quick hunch sprint, leaping across furniture like Tsuyu. He didn't touch the ground more than he had to, and even then he was keeping his feet placed near the walls of heavy furniture. Ashido watched, blinking in numb shock as he vanished up the stairwell, the door sliding shut with barely a noise. If it hadn't been for the light from the fridge and pure coincidence, Ashido would never have known he was there. Hey, Ashido cheered the next day, sliding next to the class vice pres. Could you help me with my homework? Please. Momo blinked twice, holding her cup of tea between her fingers. She smiled, a small sheepish expression across her face. Of course, Momo chirped, looking a bit off guard. I thought you liked to study with Bakugo. Ashido's grin wavered ever so slightly. Well, you know, sometimes he's a little extra blasty. Really, only Kirishima can get away with it. Momo made a small giggle, holding the cup of tea closer to her face. I have time free this afternoon. I would love to help you study. I should go ask Gyro. No, I mean Ashido trailed off anxiously. I'd love to just study with us. You know, bonding. Momo looked frazzled, then she blushed. Of course. Can I get you anything, Ashido? Is there anything in particular you are struggling with? Ashido chewed her lip. Do you know science that well? Momo beamed. I do. Ashido nearly cheered. Momo's room not only was filled with a spacious plush bed, but it smelled like expensive candles and soaps. Ashido felt like she was being pampered, only while laying on the bed. And that was before Momo got her small French pastries and exotic tea that she couldn't pronounce. Momo, Ashido started completely seriously. I love you so much. Momo hid her mouth behind one hand and giggled with a flush. It's not much, but I hope it can help you with your studying. Ashido took a gulp of the floral drink, then beamed with fresh-smelling teeth. Yes, I don't understand all of this chemistry thing. Let me help. Momo chirped, pulling out a small whiteboard and a dozen different colored markers. 2 hours later, Ashido felt dizzy with knowledge and too much tea, and Momo was casually brushing her hair, mindful of the horns. We can take a small break then review again, Momo assured her calmly, not looking upset at all by Ashido's struggles. Would you like more snacks, Momo? Ashido asked quietly, staring at the ceiling. You knew Todoroki before coming here, right? You were both recommendation students. Momo's hand stopped for a second before she resumed brushing Ashido's short hair. A little. We met at various meetings for our program. We had to go through a lot of testing as a recommendation student. Then we had to apply to our school of preference. It was a lot like our Quirk assessment test at the start of the year, except we did more tests like those for our limit. Ashido's brow twisted ever so slightly. So you had a lot of tests with him? Momo hummed slightly. I guess. There were 10 of us. We were divided and sent to 5 different schools to make sure we didn't overwhelm the applicant pool. I wasn't partnered with Todoroki often, but we did sit somewhat nearby for our paper exams. Ashido hummed in thought. Momo started weaving, tugging the pink strands of her hair into an intricate pattern for a braid. It was difficult with how short her hair was. What kind of tests did you guys have? Momo didn't stop her careful movements. You're rather curious about this. The tests were incredibly selective and adaptive based on our quirks, so I don't think they would use anything like that on us. Most of our tests were to determine our limits and adaptability. Since the tests changed so much, they were impossible to study for. Wow, Ashido laughed nervously. I sure am happy I didn't have to go through that. Momo giggled quietly. It was strong for sure. They told us the test the day before so we had time to be strategic and then perform what we had to. Even with the heads up, some of them I did horrible on. Oh, it was awful. Momo's idea of awful likely would make Ashido cry in relief. I can't imagine that. Mina confessed uncomfortably. I would have thought that you and Todoroki would have been friends, since you had stuff like that. Momo hummed in thought. He's private. We barely, really even talked. Even studying. He never really joined a group at all or during the breaks. I think he's never had many friends before. I can't imagine what he was like in middle school. Ashido shivered at the thought. Momo gently patted her shoulder teasingly. Careful there. Don't go offending our resident ice quirk user. Momo was helpful, but she hadn't really done anything for the questions itching in the back of her head. Grippy socks seem weird for Todoroki. Ashido hummed thoughtfully. You know, with his room being so traditional. I thought he'd be more about slippers. Momo shrugged behind her. I'm not sure. I was pretty surprised too when I saw them. He never mentioned before that he had any interest. Normally someone has asked me to help make clothing at some point, but he hasn't yet. Maybe he's shy. Ashido offered awkwardly. He isn't the best with conversation. Momo giggled to herself. Todoroki giving you the cold shoulder. I couldn't ever imagine it. Ashido wasn't going to let it drop, because for some reason the orange juice was bothering her a lot. She knew this was likely a rude thing to do, but something in the back of her head was screaming at her. She would eat her own horn if she was wrong, but for some reason she felt like there was something more. It was driving her crazy. Bakugo, Ashido whispered, knocking on his door quickly. He had just gone to sleep. She chased after the moment the others wouldn't notice her bolting after him. It already was tricky sneaking up the boy's side, but it was nothing she had never done before. If anything, Bakugo would be cranky and explode on her for interrupting his beauty's sleep even though there was no way he possibly could be asleep already. She kept wrapping her hand, tapping in a quick pace that she knew he'd find annoying. Less than a minute later, the door jerked open and Bakugo was glaring at her furiously. What do you want? He hissed out lowly, not screaming but clearly furious. He was smart enough to know that Ashido being on this side would get them both in trouble. Ashido grinned and forced her way into his room under his arm. He cursed and made a grab for her, running the underside of his arm on the bony ridge of her horn. She giggled as he cursed at the sharp burn, likely bruising the muscle. Sorry, she whispered back, grinning widely as he purposely slammed the door shut. The walls and doors were relatively soundproof from the hallway. What? He stated flatly, running one hand down his face tiredly. I swear to God, if you're here because of your goddamn homework, I will FC King throw you out my goddamn window. No, Ashido hurriedly interrupted. I got help from Momo. Nothing to do with homework. Promise. Bakugo stared at his ceiling with an expression of pain. Oh, Ashido blinked in realization. You don't have a shirt. Whoops. Bakugo closed his eyes, curling his hands into a fist. Small pops like bubble wrap. Ashido quickly glanced over all his muscled, carefully checking them. I guess you don't have a camel hump. Alright, that's it. You're FC King dead raccoon fact. Wait. Ashido shrieked, leaping across the room to slam across his bed and knock the pillow off. She crammed herself back against the wall, knowing he couldn't grab her easily. Can you set Sid on fire? Bakugo's face twitched. Oh, I'm going to set you on fire, all right, you little horned FCK bass. I need you to explode something for me. She squeaked out, grappling with his blanket to try and create some sort of shield. The blankets at least were likely fire retardant. Bakugo paused in a stiff movement ready to lunge at her. You won't get in trouble, I think. She hurriedly squeaked also. You want me to blow something up? Ashido nodded frantically. Bakugo's face twitched ever so slightly. I'm interested. Ashido could have sighed in relief. Can you set things on fire too? Or is it just an explosion? His face twisted into a bared snarl. What the FCK? Can you make a flamethrower? Ashido hurried out, all the while knowing that at some point soon, Bakugo was going to snap at her. Can I give you my hairspray and can you make a flamethrower? Bakugo gaped for a second. You want me to burn Sid? The FCK you on about? Raccoon eyes? Well, that wasn't a no. Ashido trailed off unsure. I want to test something. Bakugo's face flattened into a blank expression. You want me? For a science experiment? No, Ashido shivered. No more experiments and no more science. I really just want you to make a flamethrower. I thought you'd be the best with explosions. I can always get Kaminari to help if you don't think you can. OFCK no. That sit weasel isn't getting anywhere near. I am the MSDR with explosions. You hear me, you chewed up bubblegum. Ashido beamed. Yeah. Momo was there with a fire extinguisher, fretting nervously. Tsuyu was there because she was curious, and Kaminari and Gyro had set up some killer music to play in the outdoor courtyard. What's going on? Uraraka asked curiously, poking her head out of the sliding glass door. A dance party. Huh, you wish, Bakugo roared, looking far too terrifyingly gleeful to ever be allowed to repeat this again. In both hands he had cans of Kirishima's heavy-duty hairspray, held with strips of fire-retardant tape around his forearms. Ashido waited, and sure enough, the group drew the most elusive member out of hiding. Todoroki peered around, going so far to stand next to Uraraka, who didn't look uncomfortable with the nearby presence. Come on out, Ashido waved happily, holding her breath and hoping, and she nearly cheered in victory. Uraraka slid the door open and hopped out. Todoroki followed almost instantly after. He slid the door closed obediently, standing far away watching observantly. Hit it, extras, Bakugo ordered, then lowered his hands into a 90-degree angle, compressing the tab on the hairspray. It started spraying, and Bakugo detonated sparks. FOOOOOSH. Ashido cheered and screamed in delight. Bakugo lifted both eyes to the sky and screamed like a maniac as twin plumes of fire erupted into the sky. 6 feet long, Kirishima's hairspray certainly was impressive. Oh dear, Momo gaped, wordlessly conjuring another fire extinguisher. Woo, Uraraka screamed, displaying her rarely seen savage side. Look at that. That's so cool. Uraraka spun her head around, huge grin across her face. Ashido, do you think if I used my quirk he could use those like rockets? Ashido determined right then and there to never let Bakugo have access to flammable gas again. Ashido beamed, then looked beyond Uraraka. Todoroki's eyes were locked on the flames, unwavering, tense and watching. He looked pale, uncomfortable but ready for something. Bakugo spun around, twisting, and in turn the flames twisted impressively. Maybe instead of fireworks, they could just purchase American mosquito repellent. The fire twisted, Todoroki's eyes shifted somehow, and he tensed further. Ashido didn't like how it looked. The bass from the music thrummed loudly. Ashido could see other classmates peer out of the windows curiously. The display was impressive. The longer it went on, the more obvious it was that Bakugo knew what he was doing. It was incredibly unlikely that anything would be set on fire, especially since he could stop the flow of gas at any point. Todoroki twitched slightly, his left side spiking out with needle-long spots of ice. Ashido swallowed thickly. Momo, Ashido slunk to the taller girl, bumping her side casually. Hey, can you do me a favor? Gosh, Ashido was going to be killed later today. What is it? Momo asked curiously, one eye still on the fire that was starting to dwindle. Can you make me an air horn? Ashido tried to look as innocent as she could. Momo blinked at her twice, then wordlessly allowed one to pop out around her thigh. It was a little mangled, but looked like it would work. Ashido wondered if that was a common request. Ashido held the air horn reverently, then walked towards her impending demise. The flames and heat dwindled down, sputtering out. Instead of running all the way to the end where the flames and gas would be too inconsistent to be managed safely, Bakugo cut off the stream. He looked amused, thoroughly relaxed from the adrenaline rush and the heat. He tore the tape off his arm, not caring about how much it likely tore out his hairs. He kicked the canisters onto the ground, rolling his shoulders and flexing his hand. Not bad, you alien face bit. Ashido cringed, lifted her air horn and blared it. Right behind Todoroki, the dual quirk user jumped. The entire time the flames had been going on, the boy looked ready for something to happen. The air horn made it happen. And although there was no target in sight, he reacted. Faster than she could see, faster than anyone could think. Todoroki spun on instinct, and some sort of paranoia-induced reaction, a thick ice-reinforced punch came spinning for her face. She had her acid ready the entire time, so the quick slide out of the impending path was easy. His fist kept traveling, and shattered the thick wall of glass separating them from inside and outside. It broke apart with a loud noise, like Midoriya smashing a building apart. A pause, a small inhale of breath. Todoroki's eyes wide and nearly bulging, the whites showing so far he looked wrong. ... Gyro moaned quietly, cutting off the music instantly. ... We just fixed that window. At least he didn't sneeze, Ashido thought numbly. Then Todoroki bolted. He ran, moving quick in a flash towards the stairwell up and out of sight. He didn't make a noise the entire time he bolted. A pause. The rest of the glass started to fall out from the frame, sprinkling onto the ground and outside courtyard. ... The FCK. UFC King Horn Freak. Dude, Baku dude, chill. It was probably a prank and there is no. Dude, there is a lot of glass over there. Uraraka, I'm on it. I can float us over it. Bakugo ignored it, stomping over dramatically before slamming his shoulder into her back. The FCK. He snarled out lowly. Ashido gulped quietly. I had thought that. That was a FC King panic attack. UFC King pink-faced FCK muncher. Ashido drooped inwards. Bakugo stormed off, stomping over the broken glass with his thick boots. Ashido felt much worse about her impulsive actions. She didn't accomplish anything. Kaminari flopped onto his back, groaning dramatically. Groan any louder, you'll scare the birds. His friend droned flatly, turning the page of his book quietly. That's CRP. Kaminari pouted. Birds love me. I know that you're trying to turn that into a convoluted chicks love me, but for God's sake I got 2 hours of sleep and I will not withhold smashing this textbook on your face. Shinsu Hitoshi droned flatly, eyes scanning over the textbook slowly. Kaminari pouted and looked at the sky. Did you hear about how Bakugo made flamethrowers? Kaminari tried for conversation. Shinsu made a quiet humming noise, not glancing up once. It was really cool. Kaminari laughed at the memory. Oh man, then Ashido fired off an air horn and Todoroki lost his sit. He tried to punch her out and ended up breaking the window. Again, at least we don't have to try and fix it ourselves again. Shinsu twitched, pausing slightly from reading. Todoroki, the ice and fire quirk user. Yeah, I've told you about him. Kaminari argued with a pout. You know, the cool loner vibe. Oh, my mistake. I always thought you were talking about me. Shut up, you butt. Kaminari pouted, trying to smack his friend. But yeah, he smashed that big window and ran off. Momo said she would let Aizawa know. But oh man, Todoroki looked terrible after. Shinsu hummed, shifting the book so he could read the other side easier. He always looks bad. Rude man, ouch. Why do you always have to be a DCK? One day, I pray it'll scare you away. No, Kaminari grinned, nearly cooing at Shinsu's grimace. You and me are like a hairbrush and static. You have no idea what my hair is like when it's brushed. Kaminari shrugged and wiggled his way up to peer at the book. But yeah, exciting day in Dorm 1A. Todoroki flipped a sit at a flamethrower and ran off. How was your day? Shinsu frowned, lowering the book from his face. He blinked slowly, then looked out at nothing in particular. Todoroki, Endeavor's kid, right? Kaminari blinked in confusion. Yeah, pretty cool to be the son of a pro. Shinsu blinked slowly, then looked back at his book without his face changing. So what's this sit with the floor being lava that spread to my dorm? I've had to sacrifice my blanket twice for that stupid game. Kaminari nearly snorted, then jumped into the most recent disaster. Hey, Shinsu started after class, sliding into the classroom quietly. Aizawa didn't look up, giving a small grunt. Shinsu slid towards the closest desk, hopping on the surface to drop his backpack onto the floor. Shinsu liked hanging out in the classroom after class. Nobody would visit and bother them, and ... it was a good goal. Sitting on a desk in class 1A. He would be there one day, during actual class and not after hours. Shinsu fiddled with the edge of his uniform, messing with the ends of his tie. If you break it, you're not getting another. Aizawa grumbled, one eye peering at him from messy hair. You're distracted. Yep, Shinsu agreed with an easy unnerving grin. I'm always distracted. Maybe it's depression, maybe it's social anxiety. You have the worst sense of humor. Aizawa sighed exhaustedly. I had to deal with problem children all day. Please, give me 10 minutes. Never, Shinsu promised him cruelly. I've got a question anyways. That was a change. Normally he didn't ask so bluntly. Aizawa knew that too. Aizawa sighed dramatically, then held it even longer. Shinsu snickered, muttering something about the display. Aizawa kept his hands on his head, bracing himself. It took him a solid minute. Then he opened his eyes and nodded. Great. Shinsu folded his legs, smacking his palms along his knees. Todoroki, what's the hot gossip? Aizawa closed his eyes again. I thought I was prepared. I wasn't. Shinsu nearly laughed. Why are you interested in Todoroki? Aizawa sounded winded and very exhausted. Shinsu shrugged, reclining slightly and using one arm behind his back to keep his balance. He's a hot chunk of. If you finish that sentence, I am throwing you out right now. Shinsu's grin got wider. Todoroki is interesting. Aizawa started finally giving in. You know I can't give out personal information. He has a dual quirk, especially proficient and intelligent. Shinsu swung one leg under the desk back out. Well, now you're just being boring. Come on, sensei. I heard some great news earlier today. Something about a window. Aizawa pointed at the door. Get out. Get out. We are not talking about that window. Someone's a bit sensitive. Aizawa's eyes flashed red and Shinsu's grin started to falter. The fumbling on the edge of his tie got a bit worse, a bit more anxious. The entire atmosphere altered instantly. Shinsu, what is this about? Shinsu shrugged and glanced to the side, looking out over the grounds of UA. I heard a rumor that the window got broken. I was curious. You've never been curious enough before to pester me about my students. Well, you know. Shinsu paused unsure. It just felt a bit funny to me. Aizawa's expression chilled. Funny? Funny how? Shinsu sighed then glanced back over again. Isn't it a bit strange that one of your best students accidentally broke a window with a punch? A punch? You'd think he'd have better control. Aizawa's face twitched ever so slightly. Shinsu, can you get him the forms? Shinsu blurted shakily. You know the ones I have. Where she can't come on campus. Those ones. Aizawa stiffened ever so slightly in alarm. The parental restriction forms. The individuality privacy forms. You want me to talk to Todoroki about temporary school custody of him? Shinsu stared a second longer before he glanced away with another one of those infuriating shrugs of his. Just mention it, and check the trim in his room. Shinsu hopped down, grabbed his bag, then walked out of the classroom far too casually. Aizawa stared at his desk and the unmarked papers, then cursed the day he ever had such a brat walk into his life. Aizawa normally wouldn't ever break a student's privacy, but he held weight to Shinsu's words. He knew when Todoroki was at classes and when he had a break. He walked into the dorms for 1A, used his MSDR keys and unlocked Todoroki's room. It was traditional, organized to an obsessive degree. Not a speck of dirt, not a single paper out of place. Even the small rubbish bin had nothing in it. It was very, very neat. The trim, Aizawa murmured, glancing around the room for any exposed section of molding along the floor. He found one small section next to the bookcase where the tatami mats didn't press so tightly. Maybe a pencil could have fit in the gap, but Shinsu said the molding, not the mats. Aizawa settled on his knees, dug his fingernails into the molding and pried very carefully. The molding pulled apart, a large section of it sliding out easily. The molding should have been one entire piece, but somewhere near the end of the bookcase it was severed cleanly in half into a smaller portion, able to be removed. Oh, Todoroki, Aizawa breathed, pulling the wood aside to see the large gouged-out cavity into the wall itself. 4 inches tall, 3 inches long, and nearly half a foot deep. Small packets of instant noodles pressed into the gap, as well as other basic supplies. First aid, half-finished bottles of water, a disposable cell phone. God, it was an emergency kit hidden in the goddamn wall. SHT. The students came back to the dorms surprised to see Aizawa sitting on the couches, waiting for his arrival. He had forms ready, papers ready to go. Everyone, Aizawa sighed, feeling far too tired. I hate that once again, I am informing you all of an oversight. Everyone glanced around with low mumbles. Figures. Everyone, take your packet. Aizawa muttered, sliding various folders out from his side bag. Each folder was sealed with a formal name printed on the top. It was impossible to tell how thick each packet was without opening it. I understand that all of you may take this to heart, and some of you may ignore this. Aizawa stared at Bakugo, who sealed at his tongue and glanced away. Regardless, please take information to heart. Aizawa sighed, sliding it around. One by one, students took their packets, hesitant to open it. Midoriya took his with a shaky grip, looking ready to bolt. His problem child. Todoroki, please stay behind. Aizawa spoke. Everyone realized that meant they had to leave. Everyone bolted like startled birds. It was endearing if not annoying sometimes. Todoroki slid onto the couch across from him, holding his packet quietly. Aizawa folded his hands, then nodded towards the packet. Open it. Todoroki did. Then pulled out the sheaf of papers, individual packets with staples and special covers. Small business cards too, even what looked like a tiny notebook. The papers provided are all optional. I am not permitted to do anything without your consent. Aizawa started gently yet firmly. The first document is your consent for shifting guardianship rights from your parental figure to the UA institution when enrolled here. Simply said, by signing and consenting, UA will be able to make emergency medical decisions in the instances we cannot reach your parental figures. UA will have legal rights for all instances while on campus, as well as ability for punishments and retribution if necessary. Todoroki stared at the packet blankly. Thank you, sir. I do not understand why this is being explained. Aizawa steadied his voice. If you sign the packet, UA instills all mandatory applications to be submitted for parents to withdraw or take students from the campus. This means that your father will be unable to visit UA under any circumstances without us knowing it. And he will not, without our express permission, be permitted into the dorms. When he is on campus, UA has guardianship rights dominating over his. Todoroki's eyes widened in shock. The rest of the packets are for other things you may be interested in. Aizawa nodded at them. One is an application process for holiday stay, which is allowed for students who live too far away or cannot leave due to family situations. The second is a summer internship and housing application, permitting a summer dorm system to be installed and permitted. Currently, there are 5 students who have been fitted for the situation. The last packet is for our mental health facilities, and all testing if you would like for various signs of trauma or abuse. You do not need to do anything based on your results. Everything is completely confidential. Todoroki looked down at the sheafs in his hand. His hands were trembling. His face looked on the point of tears. I just need to sign. Oh, Todoroki. Aizawa's heart snapped. Yes, if you need more time. Todoroki flipped to the last page for the UA guardianship form. Aizawa-sensei, do you have a pen? Aizawa walked into class, closed his eyes and tried to steady himself. His students sat in their seats, staring at him obediently and patiently. It would have been a sight to see if not for the elephant in the room. Hell, even Bakugo was sitting up and alert. The teen rarely had his feet off his desk until Aizawa had threatened him. The room was nice and clean, crisp with something vaguely minty. Thick velvet DS hung over the boring windows, blocking out the light and making the room strangely homey. The lights were off too. Right, Aizawa stated bluntly, dropping his stack of marked papers on the front desk. Why are the lights off? Nobody answered. Aizawa turned and looked at the light SWCH. Gyro, he started calmly. Why have you destroyed the light SWCH? Gyro, in the face of danger, stood strong. I don't know what you're talking about, sir. The light SWCH are destroyed in the shape of your quirk. Someone could have slammed a USB stick in the wall. She smoothly offered in turn, sir. Aizawa rubbed his temples, hating how his brain buzzed and lulled in exhaustion. Why is my classroom filled with candles? There was a power outage. Kaminari provided with only a small hint of anxiety. Aizawa very slowly looked at the heavy DS that was blocking the morning sunshine. I'm allergic to sunlight. Kirishima blurted at the silent inquiry. Kirishima, you idiot. Your hero outfit is shirtless. I'm allergic to windows. Aizawa inhaled and rubbed his temples. Thankfully, the candles weren't scented beyond ever so slight mint. It was soothing. The small flames didn't burn and imprint behind his eyes. How did you get in here to do this? Takoyami said nothing. Dark Shadow pointed at himself dejectedly. What did you do to prevent the wax from dripping onto the table? Aizawa felt that at this point, it was better to go along with this ridiculous nonsense. I put down tape, sir. Sero provided helpfully, staring at him rather intensely. Right. Aizawa slowly looked at Todoroki, who had the blankest face of everyone. How did they bribe you into lighting all the candles? Todoroki didn't blink. Soba. The next day, Gyro, Momo, and Hagakure were uncomfortably focused, staring at him nearly obsessively. Gyro was playing classical music, a slow drooling song from her phone that rang cleanly around the room. Aizawa wasn't one for classical music. He could respect the artistry behind it, but one piano song sounded identical to the next one for him. Throughout the class she began to alternate it, staring aggressively as she jumped from acoustic guitar to harp to flute to violin. Aizawa was especially proud of how he remained composed when she began to desperately play accordion music. Aizawa opened the door to face a surplus of baking. Cinnamon and cloves and soft pastries with buttery crusts, golden and warm, and Sato looking at him desperately. Okay, at this point he knew that there was some sort of bet going. He had no idea what the goal was, but resorting to petty bribery wasn't the right way to go. Not to mention the crumbs would attract ants. I'm lactose intolerant. Aizawa bluntly stated, ignoring all of the gentle creations in preference for a jelly packet. This at least wouldn't leave crumbs. He wasn't even lactose intolerant to begin with. He figured this would stop them from trying to use food to somehow get a better grade. Sato's face fell and he looked at the various things he had made in dismay. The room really did smell nice, although it was starting to make Aizawa's eyes burn and his nose itch. He sneezed once, a small noise that wasn't particularly cute or disgusting. Thank God his sneezes weren't metaphorical gunshots like present mics, or literal gunshots like snipe. I'll eat it, Mina offered, rushing for a Danish. The entire class ate, feasting on a buffet of bribery. They are filled with lies, Aizawa thought to himself, making a note to pass out a remedial assignment for the miserable scores on their last quiz. The desks and chairs were fitted with pillows, fluffy things with various patterns. He spotted a toxic pink pattern like a dart frog lining Mina's chair. The Tsuyu had a pillow in the shape of a smiling frog's face. Okay, Aizawa spoke, numbly and in hidden shock. The room was filled with pillows, specialized pillows. Do you like it, sir? Midoriya asked with wide eyes, practically sparkling from under the all-might onesie he was wearing. He was wearing his tie still. It was obscene. Why are there pillows? He deadpanned. Oh God, was that a cat plushie sitting on his desk? The chairs are uncomfortable, sir. Takomi responded, eyes closed and reclined on a thick flannel blanket lining his chair. They aren't supposed to be comfortable, he defended. His desk looked far too alluring to be allowed. God, Midnight was going to kill herself laughing over this. That can be fixed, Mina mumbled, a full sleeping hairnet wrapped around the purple spheres of his quirk. He looked relaxed, wrapped up like a jelly crepe. Or creep. Aizawa found himself floundering, eyes skirting towards the back of the class. Todoroki often was the source of sanity. The source of sanity was reclined wearing a light blue sleep mask decorated in sheep. Aizawa fought off the lethargic haze that was filling the room like smoke. He knew any longer, and he'd start to sway on his feet. He wasn't supposed to pass out on the job. The last time he did that he lost 2 days vacation pay and had to sit through 3 hours of Netsu's tea time discussions about the benefits of vegetable oil over butter. Why don't we sit down to talk about this, sensei? Uraraka asked, eyes bright and delighted, her hair pulled into a cozy tiny ponytail. No, he had to stay strong. He couldn't falter now. He knew just the thing to awaken the haze over his senses. He knew just the right conversation explosion to leave sleep trembling in its boots. Aizawa turned to Bakugo. Bakugo lifted one eyebrow in a silent challenge. It was impressive, since the boy couldn't see. Oh, Bakugo, Aizawa spoke quietly. Not quite dismay but pretty DMN close to it. Bakugo sniffed offended, but relaxed. The cucumbers over his eyes and the bright green paste on his face looked oddly refreshing. Aizawa felt almost jealous. Aizawa wasn't strong enough for this. Aizawa was a weak man. Aizawa turned around and ran. What do you want? Aizawa broke down the next day, the entire room smelling gently of lavender and rosemary. He couldn't find the source. There was no source. The room smelt like a yoga studio and Aizawa liked it and he didn't know why this was happening to him. Ajiro looked uncomfortable, but his tail fur was extra soft and fluffy. He was working a comb through Momo's hair, shifting it into gentle braids. The smell of lavender was getting to him. He didn't want that same treatment. For God's sake, why couldn't Midoriya just go back to breaking all his limbs? Kota smuggled in cats. Maybe he bribed them like how they bribed Todoroki. He knew having a student with an animal communication quirk was a bad idea. The cats were apparently under strict order to stay on his desk or swarm him. Aizawa had never been the target of a flash mob. He had no frame of reference for what it was like to be the target of a flash mob. But he had an active imagination. He assumed it was something similar. When he saw the first cat on his desk, he thought Shinsu had smuggled it in just to bother him. When he saw the second cat, he foolishly assumed that it was a coincidence that 2 cats were found together and smuggled in. The third and fourth cats emerged together from under the desk. Aizawa could distantly recall his mind scrambling and thinking, oh no. The 5th and 6th cat emerged. There were no survivors. Aizawa bolted, rushing out of the classroom towards the teacher lounge. The cats protested. The multiple meows harmonized into a single belting noise of displeasure. It sounded demonic, and the quiet classroom realized in that moment how merciful Kota had been to them. The cats turned. 10 glowing green eyes stared creepily across the desks. Go, my friends, Kota urged them, crooning. The cats nodded, turned, and ran off in a single well-oiled machine. Shoji shivered. Majiro's tail fur was standing on end. DMN, Kaminari whispered with wide eyes. Kota is a badass. Kota flushed and fumbled in on himself, ignoring the power he possessed. He's in the lounge, Jiro reported, eyebrows furrowed in concentration. The squadron can't get past the door. Kirishima slammed his hands on his desk. The surface rattled and wobbled dangerous. Call in the bomb squad. Kirishima screamed. Everyone stared at him. Dude, Sero looked at him sympathetically. That was so lame. Bakugo grinned, swung his legs and slammed them on the floor. He stood, tilting his neck to crack audibly. We aren't supposed to leave the room, Todoroki deadpanned. Although he was already grabbing his textbooks to slide them into his bag. Nobody is going to stop us, man. Kaminari laughed. We have a literal army. The cats could be heard meowing in the hallway. A single long droning emria that sounded more like the thousands of screams of souls trapped in the afterlife. Takoyami nodded in respect. Todoroki sighed and nodded, walking after Bakugo, who slammed through the door and down the hallway. Ida took off after, shrieking about the rules regarding hallway running. Kirishima took off for damage control. When the class got to the teacher's lounge, it was to a very odd sight. Dude, Kaminari whispered in horror. Shinsu Hitoshi stood, kneeling on one leg against the teacher's lounge door. The cats were swarmed around him like a ritual sacrifice, and the class was the sacrifice. Shinsu had a very intimidating grin on his face, eyes sharp and cruel, and the cats looked very happy with the scratches along their backs. Nice cats you have here, Shinsu started conversationally, petting the alpha tomcat who was missing his front fangs so his tongue lolled out like a man slaughtering anteater. It would be a shame if something happened to them. Kaminari dropped to his knees. Shinsu, my man, please, don't do this. Anjiro stepped back, being SCRT away carefully by both Hagakure and Mina. Shinsu ignored him. Boy, you're the brain freak. Bakugo glared, teeth gritting sourly. Get out of the goddamn way. Midoriya wriggled between. No fighting. We're here for . Shinsu arched one brow. Todoroki scratched one of the cats absent-mindedly, breaking into the teacher's lounge. Shinsu CLC-ket his tongue. The noise sounded like ants on their skin. Isn't that against the rules? Ada fumbled, voice cracking. Oh please, like you care about rules. Minda spat out, scowling. One of the cats hissed at him. Shinsu's face smoothed over very quickly. You're the cranberry kid. It's G. Shinsu rolled his eyes. Minda was frozen in place. Go back to class. Shinsu sighed, eyeing the smaller boy considerably. Then tie your shoelaces together and slap yourself lightly. Minda, in a robotic pace, marched away. Gyro gave him a subtle thumbs up. We just want to make Mr. Aizawa sleep, ribbit. Isui informed Shinsu solemnly. He hasn't been sleeping, we think. Oh, Shinsu's expression lightened ever so slightly. Yeah, someone got like a busted shoulder, so he's been doing extra patrols, I think. You hired cat thugs to take him down. Koda frantically shook his head, looking distressed. Uraraka nodded, completely invalidating Koda's distress. We don't need you. Bakugo spat out angrily. I'll knock him out if I have to. Shinsu CLC-ket his tongue, stood up, and twisted the door. It opened. He stood in the doorframe and peered in. Sensei, why are there like a half-dozen cats here? From the belly of the beast, deep inside the forbidden realm of cheap coffee and poor life choices, Aizawa groaned out a toneless. Shinsu, don't you dare. Oh no, my hand is slipping. Shinsu drawled flatly, not sounding apologetic in the slightest. So many cats. You know how it is. Shinsu, oh how the pretty die so young. I would rather suffer death than you're childish. Shinsu's eyes lit up. His body twitched and Aizawa froze mid-word. Shinsu turned, looking at the class with a level of deranged delight that would scare even Shigaraki. Then suffer, he whispered, stepping aside to allow the teacup jaguars to charge into the room. Shinsu closed the door quietly, released his quirk. Stone cold, Kaminari whispered, before Bakugo stepped on his face. Present Mike was worried when he came in to take over class, and instead of the usual shouting and exasperated expression, he met something from a horror film. The students all had a packet of papers, a surprising amount, stapled together. Clearly it was busy work, but by the intense near-panicking level of effort going into it, their grades likely relied on it. Aizawa was sitting on his desk, crossed-legged on the top. He never did that. The chalkboard was completely clean. There were no books or papers next to him. Hell, he didn't even have his sleeping bag. Present Mike breathed, his whispers loud enough that Aizawa's head snapped around towards him like a hungry owl. His eyes were glazed, bloodshot, and filled with restrained fury. You're not having them today. Aizawa deadpanned. Present Mike shivered. They're being punished. The students didn't look up. They kept desperately scribbling. Minda was sobbing so strong it was impressive he could write it all. What did they do? Present Mike whispered in horror. The last time he had seen something of this caliber, it was years ago when the entire class was expelled. Released cats on me, Aizawa informed him calmly. Made me sleep. Oh, you poor fools. Present Mike laughed uncomfortable. It sounded pinched and winded. You know how it is. Sleep for a week. Sleep is for the weak. Aizawa returned with frightening intensity. His eyes were slowly turning red. There is no God. Present Mike nodded, trying to hide the fact he was terrified for his life. He paused, quickly scrambling for his phone to play one song on full blast in the small crack under the frame. Hello darkness, my old friend. Oh, Shota was going to kill him. Quirks were still something of a private thing. There existed a sense of social status around it. Nobody was born equal to someone else, no two. Quirks were the same no matter how similar they seemed. Everyone was different, so it was impossible to know exactly what to expect. As a child, a quirk often dictated your profession. Anything veering towards possible medical uses went into those fields. Anything emotional-based turned to mental health facilities or police work. Technology quirks turned towards engineer or programming. Your quirk both made you unique and make you the same. You couldn't ask someone what their quirk was. That would be on par with asking someone how much they were worth. There was ... you just didn't do that. It was something private. There was no obligation to discuss your quirk to the dirtiest details to anyone else. Maybe they should have done more extensive testing for heroes in training. Maybe then they would have realized the medical problems that may occur due to extensive quirk usage, or the problems that came up along the way. There was a thunderstorm on the way, a buzz in the air and the slight haze in the sky. It didn't seem spectacular, maybe a bit of thunder later that day. The rain was going to make the ground all muddy. With how much they trained, it was almost a sure thing that the laundry machine would beg for mercy. The moment the air seemed to fizzle with energy. Holding with a bated breath, Kaminari started to flinch. He grimaced, staring out the window of homeroom as the clouds rolled in a single undulating movement. The static was so strong that a buzz thrummed, ozone reeking like the smell of nitroglycerine on the hottest days. Kaminari slowly lifted his hand, ignoring how it wavered in the air. Aizawa stopped instantly from where he was detailing what the next week quiz would entail. It wasn't that he wasn't used for questions, he just didn't expect them from Kaminari. Kaminari, Aizawa stated, staring at the teen without blinking. Yes, thanks sir. Kaminari fumbled, ignoring the itching along his spine. Can I, be excused for the rest of the day? Aizawa stared at him. There's an hour left in the day until you're dismissed. Rain started to fall, gently pattering against the window. Midoriya glanced to the side, watching the water splat absent-mindedly. Yeah. Kaminari laughed anxiously, feet twitching unsure. It's just the storm. Aizawa finally blinked, arched his eyebrows in disbelief, then looked out the window. The storm was an exaggeration. It was barely more than a sprinkle. Aizawa looked back slowly before he sighed through his nose. All right, it was worth a try. The static seemed to increase. Kaminari rolled his shoulders, trying to thwart off the thrumming he felt. It resonated so deeply in his bones and through his muscle like a live wire. He knew he was twitching, feet tapping frantically against the floor. He'd likely have to head out into the storm later just to let out some steam, try and get the itch out of his vessels. His mind fogged and jerked, zapping him into awareness, which quickly lulled back into dazed confusion. His mouth felt chalky, a little off. He felt too active, too exposed, and a flash of light flared across the room. Kaminari slid from his seat and hit the floor with a soft noise, accompanied a second later by the dull rumble from the lightning strike. Then Kaminari started to seize. Get back, Aizawa hissed, lunging forward and dropping his papers on the floor. They fluttered to the ground gently, desks SCD as people shoved themselves away. Kaminari was shifting, limbs moving uncontrollably in painful contortions, muscles flexing and joints curling until each knuckle was bone white. Eyes rolled back in his head, jaw dropped to the side with exposed teeth. He looked pale, but flushed at the same time. Aizawa reached down to roll the boy on his side gently. The moment he made contact, he hissed and jumped back, falling on his rear. Sparks flew, large glowing embers that could have easily caught flame. Momo was forcing her way forward, yanking a thick cord from her sternum like it was a circus act. The woven cord was as thick as her forearm, braided and insulated with RBB. Here, she gushed, cluing into the situation quickly. It's industrial for power lines. It should hold enough voltage it won't hurt anyone. Electricity sparked across Kaminari's skin. His legs jerked into an uncontrollably firm kick. His ankle caught a desk that didn't shift far enough. The way the metal pulsed, and faster than anyone could blink, the wooden surface caught fire. Mina squeaked in alarm, jolting backwards. Bakugo, the closest to the desk besides her, lunged forward. He slapped his hands down, suffocating the flame under the thick calluses. Minor explosions crackled, burning the desk further. But with no conscious effort to release the sweat, it didn't escalate into a full fire. Right, Momo fumbled, unbuttoning her uniform further to try and haul something out of the soft exposed skin of her torso. Aizawa's eyes didn't avert once from where he was scouting Kaminari's seizing body. Momo hastily buttoned her shirt once she had hauled out what looked like a heft box. Boat battery. She breathed, looking slightly woozy. Lighter than ... than a car, but should be fine. Hagakure, help her away, Aizawa ordered, already twisting the copper braids of the cord to the appropriate adapters on the marine battery. Once it was firmly connected, he very cautiously fed it into the bent claws of Kaminari's stiff hands. After a few sparks, the battery's small light FLC curd on in a gentle cherry glow. Kaminari made a low noise. A few tiny sparks fizzled out near his neck. ... It must have been the lightning strike. Midoriya squeaked out, looking far too nervous but bright and aware. He was staring at Kaminari, with one hand to his chin. The increased electricity in the air from the static must have somehow accumulated, and then the sheer amount of it must have triggered a seizure instead of frying his brain like normal. Is he going to be okay? Gyro asked, held back by one of Sero's arms on her shoulder. Fine, Aizawa clipped out, keeping an eye on how his muscles began to slowly relax. Has any of this happened to you? Any fits or episodes? Uraraka stared at the scene in horror, looking a bit more pale than usual. No, Takoyami explained shortly. Not within the dorms. No episodes we have witnessed or experienced. Aizawa nodded once, staying in a crouch until Kaminari's breathing began to settle into something smooth. Another bolt of lightning fizzled through the air, but this one didn't seem to affect Kaminari in the slightest. 5 minutes later, Kaminari started to stir, mumbling out small illogical slur of words before he could blink and focus. "Am on th floor?" he asked, hand twitching and uncurling while the other grabbed the cord confused. "Kaminari, look at me," Aizawa ordered, eyes carefully. FLC curved from one eye to the next, noting the foggy gaze that was slowly clearing. "Where are you?" Kaminari blinked slowly. Floor." Aizawa didn't sigh in exasperation, which showed how important it was. "What building?" "Oh," Kaminari mumbled tiredly, homeroom. "Going over a quiz." Aizawa frowned ever so slightly. "You're very lucid for having a seizure." "Yeah," Kaminari agreed, grunting loudly as he started to hoist himself into a sitting position. No, Mina blurted, waving her hand frantically. Aizawa used one hand to ever so gently keep Kaminari on the floor. "Stay there a moment longer," Aizawa stated flat. The battery had a nice glow to it, well charged. "'Kay," Kaminari agreed lazily, yawning as he stretched the best he could. "'S fine though." Aizawa's eyes jerked back in an instant. "You call having a seizure fine?" "Yeah," Kaminari mumbled tiredly. "Storms, why no. Happens. It happens." Aizawa deadpanned, looking thoroughly exhausted. "Of course, it happens. And you didn't think to tell anyone." Kaminari shrugged, although it was awkward from where he sat on the floor. "Have batters in room. You have industrial batteries you brought with you," Aizawa translated flatly, "so you don't have seizures." "From thunderstorm. Kaminari summarized sleepily. "Cool socks." Aizawa looked at his ankles. He was wearing cat socks. After that, the dorm was on alert. The tricky thing with quirks was that it was strong to tell what was normal and what wasn't. Internet forums were filled with people who assured it's fine, because maybe it was for them, but for someone else it may be horrible. Coughing BLD for someone may be normal, but for someone else it means death. You can't calculate what was normal and what wasn't based on others, but because of that everyone assumed what was normal wasn't okay. "So, Gyro," Mina started, staring at her intently from the couches. There was some sort of fashion show on the television that both she, Gyro, and Ayama were watching lazily. "Yeah?" Gyro asked, bored, using one hand to prop her head up. "So, your quirk sure is neat. Very flexible and cool, and wow. It must be so helpful, and I wonder about how piercings would work." And Gyro glanced at her oddly. Mina seemed very oddly focused. "This is a very long way to ask if it's okay your ears are bleeding," Mina nearly shouted, looking just as ashamed of herself as Ayama looked startled. "Hey," Ayama gasped in alarm. "Sani?" Gyro blinked quickly. "Dude, Ayama. We're learning English. Please don't throw a third language on top of it." Ayama huffed and crossed his arms with a scowl. "Seriously though," Mina chimed in, staring focused. "You're like bleeding from your ears. Is that normal?" "Ayama, is that normal?" "Why me?" Ayama asked with a huff. Mina used one hand to point at her head, where her ears had ever so slight differences. Ayama looked in unsure as he touched his own ears. Do not believe it is normal." "Yes." Gyro lifted one hand to touch her earlobe. The left one was sticky with sure enough, BLD. "Oh, don't worry about it." Gyro shrugged off, glancing at the horrible pink satin the television was showing on designer as using. "It happens." Mina trailed off. It was a bad tone, a very suspicious tone. "Oh no," Gyro blurted. No, seriously, it's fine. It isn't an issue." "Mina, don't you dare. I don't want you to have a seizure," Mina wailed. And of course, it was right when someone was coming down the stairs. Todoroki was horribly equipped to deal with social interaction. Having a hysterical Mina bawling, a bleeding Gyro, and a scandalized Ayama didn't help. Todoroki said, because truly that was the only thing he could think of. Mina looked at him with tears in her eyes. Todoroki blinked. "Please, don't do this." Gyro shook her head slowly, looking thoroughly alarmed. "Don't do this, Todoroki. You're bleeding." Todoroki finally noticed. Bleeding from the ears isn't good. Mina burst into new tears. Gyro looked ready to run. Ayama fell sick at his fingers at the TV. That color in DM. Truly horrid. Todoroki glanced at the TV. The woman was displaying the badly sewn dress. "That shade is bright." Gyro scoffed at the TV. Her ear was still bleeding. "Todoroki, help." Mina pointed at Gyro dramatically. Todoroki stared. "Did you lose the remote?" No, Mina wailed, her ear. Oh, Todoroki nodded, conjuring a lump of misshapen ice. Mina slapped her face. Aizawa took the phone call with grace. The phone on the wall was a direct line to his cell, although using it wasn't necessarily an emergency. He accepted it calmly, advised some gentle warm compresses, and recovery girl could investigate the source at the earliest convenience. It turns out that she had a small hole, a perforation in the lining of her ear canal that never quite closed. Extensive Quirk usage did that. Ida and Midoriya were lagging behind. They had early Quirk practice, nothing combative. Only Quirk use, extensive training to try and better their abilities, not against one another. Everything was going well. Ida had beat his top speed, although the recipro burst left his legs cramping. The explosions from Bakugo made the smoke so thick they had to open the roof to air it out properly. Dark Shadow managed to reach a new distance, clawing through the floor as Hagakure ran all the way across the building, pulling the thick rope out of Momo's thigh. It was a good practice session. Then Todoroki iced the building. It was just as large as the sports festival, but Midoriya and Ida happened to be closer than normal. They recovered and got away fine, but the training was bright and early in the day. They still had classes. Ida was acting as usual, although Asui was first to notice the subtle twitching of his face. The way his eyebrows were furrowed and the crease around his eyes seemed a little more pinched. His notes were fine as normal, but instead of the perfect posture he was slightly hunched. Asui glanced over to see if Midoriya had noticed, only to see a similar reaction. Instead, the green-haired teen had his head bowed and eyes closed. His pencil was held very loosely in a slightly clenched hand, no marks of ink on his notes. That was ... very unusual. Midoriya was normally obsessive over how he wrote out his notes for studying later. He was nearly always jotting down words in his notebooks. Copying the board was simple for him. Asui croaked out a small noise absent-mindedly as she considered the two teens curiously. They hadn't been doing any combat training. Besides, Ida normally didn't get hurt anyways. There was something about them that spoke of pain, although she doubted that they had any injuries. Was it something big enough to make a deal about? Should she bring it to attention that neither of the two looked okay? Midoriya's face was pale, a little bit strained on the edges. His arms were motionless on his desk, stuck in a slightly gnarled. Asui glanced at the board to hastily scribble down the new notes on the board. Midoriya still hadn't moved his hands in the slightest. The lesson ended and they gained a quick 10-minute break. Most students remained sitting, stretching in their seats or spinning to chat with the person behind them. Takoyami took this break to hop up on his desk, glancing around before chatting with Shoji from his perched position. Midoriya took this break to lean forward and rest his forehead against the desk. His arm didn't move. Hey Tsu, Uraraka beamed, clapping her hands together as she peeked at Asui's notes. Wow, you write so quickly. Asui blinked slowly. I try to write fast enough to listen. Otherwise I don't hear the lecture. Uraraka blushed. Maybe I should try that. I'm completely lost on that assignment for English. Asui croaked and glanced over. Midoriya still hadn't moved. That was very odd, even for him. Ida looked similarly troubled. What had they done differently? Did they sneak out last night? Were they hurt and not admitting it? She'd understand that from Midoriya, but Ida seemed like a stickler for the rules. All right, Aizawa groaned, wiggling his way into the sleeping bag. 10 minutes, you better be in your seat. They chimed out their agreement, and Aizawa face planted. It was a remarkable sight. Asui felt bad that she was going to be ruining his nap. Excuse me. Asui nodded politely, hopping to her feet. Uraraka stepped aside and politely started to copy the notes she had missed. Uraraka had such nice rounded handwriting. Asui waded through the desks, hopping over Ajiro's tail where it flopped into the aisle. He apologized quickly, but she was already on her path. Walking across the cleared area at the front of the room, she folded into a very comfortable crouch. Aizawa-sensei, she croaked out, blinking out of politeness. I'm sorry for interrupting you. Then don't. The yellow caterpillar moaned into the plush padding. Asui found the request was reasonable. I think we have a situation, she explained thoughtfully. A lightning situation? Aizawa groaned out a low flat noise that conveyed pain and agony. Asui thought they should be listening to that single groan instead of the English audiobook of Romeo and Juliet like they were expected to. It certainly sounded more like a tragedy in the making. Aizawa slowly opened one eye, glowing red from the darkness of the sleeping bag. Is anyone bleeding? No. Is anyone unconscious? No. Then I'm going back to sleep. Aizawa mumbled, wiggling slightly, although it was strong to tell what had changed through the bulky shape of the sleeping bag. Asui blinked slowly. It's Midoriya, sensei. A pause. Then another even more disappointed groan. Aizawa slowly emerged like a peeling butterfly made out of barbed wire and children's tears. All right, Aizawa groaned, shakily rising with a deep scowl. Midoriya. And Ada, sir. Asui croaked. Aizawa didn't blink but called out the class president also. The room's chatter started to dwindle, but revived with curiosity. Midoriya's head shot up in alarm, so quick it looked like it hurt. Ada paled before he jerked to his feet. Both students made their way to the front of the class carefully. Eyes followed them with minor interest. Hello, Asui blinked slowly. Both of you are in pain, but you don't have any injuries from practice. You got enough sleep and seemed fine this morning at breakfast. Midoriya's eyes widened and he started floundering. No, it's okay, it's really fine. You haven't been taking notes, Kiro, Asui pointed out bluntly. Aizawa's eyes seemed to smolder. Whatever is wrong with you two becomes my problem when it impacts your schoolwork. You want to tell me, or do you want Recovery Girl to get involved? Midoriya paled to a shade like off-white eggshell. It was impressive, really. Yes, sir. Ida's hand curled into a fist. It was foolish of me to allow this to affect me. I will no longer allow my education to suffer. Aizawa yawned. Yeah, right. Midoriya looked much more sheepish. It's just training this morning. Midoriya hung his head solemnly. It was really cold and it was my fault, but I stuck too close to Todoroki's ice and my arm started hurting. Unfortunately, I suffered the same. Ida hung his head with equal dismay. Aizawa blinked confused for a moment before his eyes flickered across the two in front of him. Right, Midoriya, Ida, disassemble this. Aizawa swiped a pen from his desk, one of the few that could unscrew to refill with more ink cartridges. Ida grasped it, staring at the pen with something like resignation. Midoriya fumbled and could barely catch it, making a low breathy noise that Asui couldn't identify. Aizawa's hand shot out, grabbing Midoriya's heavily scarred fingers in a tight grip. With a difficult-to-read expression, he used his hands to gently shift and tug on the slightly bent fingers. Midoriya made a low-pitched whine, entire body jolting slightly at the movement. He closed his eyes tightly. You're the same. Aizawa's eyes flickered to Ida, who was having difficulty getting his one hand to respond. I'm sorry, it's not normally so bad, Midoriya babbled, breath hitching as Aizawa guided his hand into a slow fist. It was unrealistic to presume you wouldn't have nerve damages given your medical history. Aizawa sighed, slowly forcing the fingers through the movements again and again. Leaving them curled in such a state will only exhaust your hand muscles and lead to further degradation of your coordination. You need to move your hands through exercises, even if it hurts. Midoriya made a small choked-off noise, nodded quickly. Aizawa's eyes flickered back towards the desk. You're not writing, Aizawa stated, and Asui felt like she was eavesdropping now. Midoriya trailed off, blushing in shame. It's fine, Aizawa deadpanned. We have disability services to accommodate for a variety of needs. If your dexterity permits, we can allow you to use a laptop in class. You too, Ida. Depending on the severity of your damage, we can permit audio recording or I can give you a transcript of my lesson plans. Midoriya flushed sheepishly and looked at a spot on the floor. We will do better, sir, Ida nearly shouted. Aizawa's grip tightened slightly. We'll need both of you to head to Recovery Girl to see if we can do anything about this. Aizawa's eyes flickered between the two. I recognize that neither of you are at fault for this. We can look into procedures to assist with pain management, medications for reducing nerve signals or muscle cramping. Midoriya's eyes watered. Asui felt very out of place. Ayama was heaving into a bowl, sprawled out on the couch. He had been heaving off and on for a few hours now, well past the point of expelling anything. They had rigorous training earlier, far more than usual. Even Todoroki awkwardly admitted that he was sore from all the work. Ayama heaved, and thin specks of BLD appeared, dotting his pale waxy face. Code Lightning, Ajiro shouted, jumping up from the couch. Uraraka, the closest to the phone, already had it dialed, handing it over obediently. Mr. Aizawa. Ajiro rushed out nervously, eyes flickered to the repeated heaving. Ayama is vomiting BLD. He's been heaving for an hour now. I think he tore something. Momo dropped next, or rather, she didn't show up to class. It was very odd. As assistant class president, she rarely ever missed class. She normally had notes in preparation, color-coded and ready to go. Momo didn't appear in class, and Izuku couldn't help but feel stressed over it. It was a bit chill outside. His arms were wrapped with thin warmers that made him feel like a happy cat. His muscles felt like jelly, and for the first time in forever he felt calm. The small laptop he had been given by Yue helped, since writing with pencil or pen sometimes was difficult. Momo didn't appear, and Izuku found himself nervously twitching. The first break they had, Izuku squirreled his way over to where Gyro was scrolling through her MP3 looking for some specific song. Gyro, he began in a squeak, far too aware of how loud his voice was. So, I was wondering if you maybe knew where Momo was, since you're always hanging out with her and... Whoa, Gyro blinked in surprise, lifting one hand in alarm. Chill, Midoriya. What's gotten you all crazy? Izuku flushed and gave a small awkward squeak. Momo, yeah. Gyro kicked back in her chair, twirling her ear jack lazily. She used the other to plug into the MP3, listening to her music without headphones. She's with Recovery Girl in surgery. Izuku's jaw dropped and he inhaled sharply. Surgery? Yeah, didn't you hear? Hagakure asked, popping up from behind Gyro's shoulder. She went over yesterday. Gallstones. Izuku blinked. Gee, gallstones. She has to eat a lot of fatty foods. Ajiro piped up with a small uncomfortable grimace. The lipids she can't break down or use I guess make gallstones. Poor girl. Hagakure sighed quietly. I hear they're the worst. Huh. Tsuyu walked into the dorm room looking miserable and holding a large bottle of Tums. She walked over to Ayama, casually split the contents with him, then retreated to her room. Takoyami made noises of distress as his feathers began to fall out. Large patches that looked like raw hamburger, small sections of newly growing quills that looked like translucent toothpicks. Takoyami groaned. Small high-pitched whistling noises of pain as with every shudder, more fluffy down shed from the back of his neck or around the line of his eyes. He looked horrible, even wearing his hood drawn up high to disguise the lack of glossy black feathers. Aizawa didn't say anything on the disregard for the dress code, seemingly aware of how Takoyami felt even more miserable than he looked. Uraraka wasn't sure if Takoyami stuck to the general molting season of most birds, or if he ran on a different internal calendar. It would be incredibly inconvenient if it happened multiple times over the year. Todoroki also looked miserable. Maybe it was the chill in the air that was affecting everyone. Tsuyu seemed to be slowing down, now wearing a thick fluffy coat even in class. Midoriya had offered her one of his arm warmers, going so far as to investigate other sources that the support team could make. Tsuyu gratefully accepted with teary eyes. Ashido's slime concentration was weirdly thick, gooey and firm in places it shouldn't be. It always took her a while to accommodate for the coolness in the air and the sudden dryness. Already her lips were crackling and chapping. She could only imagine how poor Takoyami felt without a fluffy coat to keep the cold out. It wasn't anywhere close to snowing or freezing, but it was dry enough to be uncomfortable and make them all miserable. It was near that temperature where Sero was getting frustrated when his fingerprints were not registering on the touch screen, and when Kaminari was a hot commodity in the main room due to the convenience of making sure a corner of the electric heated blanket. Todoroki had reached a new level of petty. At the start of the year he was cold and dismissive. It took a fair amount of time for him to warm up to the degree where he was willing to casually insult and roast authority figures within earshot. They all assumed that was as thawed as Todoroki got, but he was simmering with rage on an entirely new level. His lips were chapped and peeling worst of anyone, although only on one side of his mouth. His right side seemed well adapted for the chill in the air, but the other side was peeling like a thick sunburn with BLD cracking on the corners. His scar was pinched and peeling, darker in color and looking so inflamed there were heat waves coming off his face. Ouch man, Gyro winced quietly, hunkering low to not be seen as he stormed past the couches, heading up towards the staircase where he would likely sulk in his dorm. I know, I'm breaking out too. Ashido grimaced, her hand brushing around the base of her horns where her skin was peeling and cracking uncomfortably. You all need coconut oil. Hagakure sighed from her sprawled position. Oh wait, Momo ate it all. Momo flushed and sunk lower on the couch, eyes dilated from her post-surgery medication. I apologized. I know, we love you. Ashido soothed playfully, glancing over curiously towards the kitchen. Oh man, is that Kirishima? I see the short fuse. Gyro whispered low, sliding further down her couch. This isn't fair. How does he look perfect? Nobody would ever say anything out loud, but Bakugo's skin was flawless. They had never seen him with a blemish or mark other than an injury. Even in the cold, he didn't have flaking skin or cracked lips. He looked as casual as a day in summer, except maybe a small flush to his ears. They watched somewhat eagerly as Bakugo proceeded to shriek, guzzle more water to add to the ridiculously high water content he consumed on average, and stormed off. Kirishima playfully pouted. His hair was drooping a bit from the gel in the air not working. Well, Ashido sighed dramatically. He may not have a water hump, but I swear he's gotta moisturize. I'm not smacking his butt again. Sero defended, picking at the small scabs near his elbows. Sometimes after tiring days, or more difficult training sessions, his joint would bleed the smallest bit. Never again. It nearly broke my hand. Some people are into that. Kaminari snickered, ignoring all the immediate protest. Bro, no. Kirishima moaned into the couch, barely stirring even as others began to file into the room. Oh no, pulling a Kaminari. Gyro deadpanned playfully. Hagakure instantly broke into high-pitched giggles, a faint noise of her smacking her thigh. Kaminari started protesting. Gyro cackled and casually leapt onto the couch to smack him further into the cushions. Gyro, Momo scolded, settling herself nearby with a book in her hands. She was wearing something glossy and clear over her skin, likely to protect from drying out. Don't be mean. Can't stop me. Gyro pouted, glancing over at the stairwell to give a small wave at Kota. Hey, plenty of room over here if you want. There's also sunflower crackers in my cupboard. Kota flushed and silently nodded, escaping into the kitchen before darting back upstairs. Poor guy. Momo sighed quietly. Anxiety seems so cruel. His rabbit is super fluffy though. Gyro informed them all sagely. Honest to God, almost died when I saw the thing. I'm so jealous. Kirishima slurred into the couch cushions. Ashido grinned. Takoyami emerged next, looking very fluffy with new feather growth. Ajiro's tail was extra fluffy as well from the chill. You're looking good. Hagakure laughed from the chair. Oh, we should have a spa night. No, Kaminari moaned, and thus the idea died. Everyone was fairly curious about how Bakugo's skin seemed so perfect. Actually, his quirk didn't seem to have any side effects. Does the dude have like? Sero squinted slightly and thought. High BLD pressure. He's always screaming. Nope, Midoriya absent-mindedly responded from where he was washing the dishes. Kaken's quirk keeps his BLD pressure steady and low. Wow, Sero deflated instantly. There goes mandatory anger management. Midoriya almost choked on his own spit. Bakugo's quirk did have side effects. They just weren't as noticeable. Seeing a medical provider for quirk issues or adaptive devices was common. Although Yue had the oversight to conveniently forget about it, Bakugo was smart. He knew that his quirk was dangerous, so he took all the measures he needed to well before the entrance exam even. He had the fingerless gloves made to absorb liquids from quirks like his. He had the protective gear for when he flew on flights, the bright fluorescent orange that labeled him as possible danger in disaster scenarios. He was used to being separated from his family on trains and planes, placed in the emergency quirk sections due to possible accidental explosion. Bakugo knew how to work with his quirk. He knew the muscle pain and shockbacks would occur, and all the torn muscles or strained joints. He knew. When he was in middle school and already his shoulders were tightening from exercise, he had seen countless physical therapists and massage specialists fixing tight joints or nerve problems. Bakugo was smart about it, but it didn't make it easier when his forearms hurt. Nobody really thought about how much effort and force went behind each of his blasts, how much micromanagement he had to put into it to make sure he didn't have too much property damage. Without his gauntlets, which helped with careful pressure, his muscles would jerk and spasm out of his control. His forearms would throb in agony, only for gentle pressure to try and relieve most of the developing knots. Bakugo wouldn't go and show anyone. He didn't need anyone knowing. But he was more relieved when at the end of the day he could drag his knuckles along his wrist and force out the marble-sized lumps. He spat out more curses when he was forcing his elbow to relax. He had lotions and creams, things to try and get the shock and the bruises to fade faster. Sit that smelled weird and always reacted odd with the glycerin on his sweat. He relaxed, getting ready for bed at the earliest convenience, unrolling athletic tape to bind carefully around his arms to relieve some of the throbbing pressure. It was almost a relief when he finally got a chance to relax. Aizawa groaned from the couches, the entire dorm building empty of all late-night insomniacs. The blur from his computer made his eyes throb. It felt like honey mixed with acid, grit running on the edges of his busted tear ducts. His ophthalmologist already hated him. What was one more late-night call for more prescription eye drops? He dropped in 3 drops in each eyes, keeping them open so they could work on the surface. The ceiling of the dorm had small patches where Tsuyu had torn down the light fixture accidentally. He was so tired he had half a mind to slump onto his side and just crash on the couch. He still had lesson plans to finish, especially since the project for next week had an error in its rubric and he had to redesign the entire DMN thing once he noticed that his Ashi put Minta and Bakugo in one group. That was asking for bloodshed. And since the school wasn't liable for informing others of blood-borne diseases, that was just a pain of paperwork. He groaned quietly and squinted at his laptop. It was still stinking of energy drink from where it had soaked into the space bar, but thankfully it still worked. The front door to the wanted dorm building opened. A small CLC king noise that wasn't Midoriya, so as far as he cared it wasn't his problem. Padded feet walked towards him, staggering really, then slumped over the armrest in such a characteristically I hate the world. Aizawa knew instantly who it was. Your dorm building is across the campus. Aizawa spoke. His voice was gravel and hoarse. He'd need more coffee soon. Or another energy drink. Oh wow, didn't know that. Shinsu moaned into the nearest decorative pillow. They really should get rid of those DMN things. There was something in Shinsu's voice that caused Aizawa to stop tapping. Something in the misery that seemed unique and pressing. Aizawa squinted at Shinsu, scanning over his gnarled hair. Very gnarled, like he hadn't gotten out of bed all day despite it being the weekend. What are you doing up? Aizawa ventured to ask. Already his eyes were itching again. Can't sleep. Shinsu slurred, collapsed over the armrest practically folded in half. Aizawa doubted his feet were even touching the ground. Can't think. Oh, that was bad. Aizawa slid the laptop from his lap onto the coffee table and adjusted himself instantly. The health of his students were much more important than one rubric of an assignment in a few days. How long? Aizawa asked, hesitating for 1 second before he reached out to rest on hand on the back of Shinsu's head. His hair was unbrushed. He could feel the snarls under his palms now that he was touching. Shinsu groaned quietly and slumped forward, somehow sliding onto the couch and closer to Aizawa's knee with the grace of a slug. Aizawa squinted at him, barely illuminated from his laptop. Shinsu made ever so small whimpers, hand and feet twitching uncontrollably. How bad is this one? Aizawa dared to ask, keeping his voice low and steady. He didn't lift his hand, but shifted it slightly into a small soothing gesture. No. Shinsu whimpered into the couch, face pressed flat. Likely the light from the laptop was too much from him. Hurts. Migraines were never fun, especially for a mental quirk like Shinsu's. Aizawa may have never believed it could escalate so badly if it wasn't for Recovery Girl sliding over his file the first time Shinsu had an injury that needed healing. Apparently the first time he had a government-funded MRI for a concussion when he was a kid, the test sent him into a seizure. And not like Kaminari, but an uncontrollable seizure which left his quirk running rampant. Aizawa had never felt such chilling horror than he did that day looking through the medical files. 13 days in a medication-induced coma, intubated and on a ventilator. The pictures of Shinsu, small and defenseless, left him horror-struck. "Sensei," Shinsu asked, holding a bag of ice to his cheekbone. The bags under his eyes were so dark. "Are you all right?" Shinsu made a small whimper on the couch, and Aizawa exhaled heavily. "You want me to take you back to your dorm?" Aizawa paused slightly. "Or have the construction workers not soundproofed your building yet?" The hero course students were of higher priority since their quirks were more property damaging. With how many hero students they had every given year, the support students still were behind on a few construction projects. Shinsu managed with one trembling hand to grab onto Aizawa's shirt. He clung there, barely moving and breathing shallowly. "I'm going to keep working." Aizawa spoke quietly, slowly. "I'll type softly. If you need anything, let me know." Shinsu made a very quiet noise that may have been a sob from where he was pressed so firmly into Aizawa's side. The boy was shaking. How rage-inducing. That migraines couldn't be cured like a spike through his heart. Aizawa was gone by the time Shinsu woke up, head still throbbing obscenely. The couch wasn't as comfortable as his bed, but with the constant noise in the general education dorms crashing in one of dorms was worth it, even if his sensei had vanished. It wasn't the first time Shinsu had woken up in a place he didn't remember going. What was surprising was the small sting of static in someone's thigh under his face. It smelled like drool and Shinsu's morning breath. "Oh, morning sunshine," Kaminari chirped far too excitedly. Shinsu almost groaned except his mouth was dry. There was a blanket over his back, soft and plush. Shinsu kept the light out. He didn't need to get up, and generally he would hide away from the sparkling enthusiasm of the blonde. It was far too early for this. "Who's the babe?" Someone spoke, a low giggling voice with a lisp. Shinsu ignored whoever it was, trying to fall back asleep. His hair was mostly down, knotted and hanging like a curtain. Kaminari started, sounding slightly uncomfortable. Shinsu could feel his thigh flex. "Look at you, lady killer." A person lisped out with another low, uncomfortable chuckle. "Is she hot?" Shinsu huffed and sat up. He wouldn't survive the chatter anyway. "The FCK," the student said, short with purple ... hair. Shinsu only faintly remembered the student anyways. LFC King Trap. Shinsu's brain stopped working. Kaminari flinched back. "Dude," Kaminari hissed out, entire body tense. Shinsu blinked through a restart, only able to stutter out nonsensical syllables. "God." The student sneered with a disgusting look. "FC King F." Shinsu's gut dropped and he stopped listening. Kaminari stumbled off into shocked silence. Then a quiet, "Bro." Shinsu tried to ignore the sharp pierce in his chest, shoving himself off the couch into a rushed, awkward stumble. His throat itched, his face felt gross and flushed. He just was called. He was used to his quirk being a point of blame. He had never had someone attack his orientation or his gender, and ouch. He hadn't ever built any resistance, now that he'd need it, but he wasn't prepared for that, and it hurt bad. "Bye," Shinsu muttered out, voice sounding choked as he shuffled out of the room and into the piercing sunlight. For the first time, he didn't care how it made his headache throb. "Dude," Kaminari stared at Minta with something cold in his stomach. "Are you serious?" Minta scoffed and crossed his arms with a huff. "Dude, that's so gay to have a guy laying on you." Kaminari ignored the buzz of frustration. "He was sleeping." Minta rolled his eyes. "You better be careful, he's probably at HMO." Kaminari very patiently and very carefully didn't let his voice shake. "Is that bad?" "Oh, it's so gross." Minta's face twisted into horror, going too far as to dramatically dry heave. "God, he should be kicked off UA. This school has no place for Fago." "Right," Kaminari thought with chilling clarity. "Okay." Kaminari placed a fake smile on his face, hopped to his feet, and walked out of sight of Minta. The telephone in the wall was a direct line to Aizawa, but it was later in the day. Almost noon. Their teacher was normally awake by then anyways. It wasn't a lightning situation, but ... well, Kaminari wasn't stupid. Most of the time, he was friends with Shinsu, no matter how much the other would deny it. Kaminari had seen plenty of the bruises on Shinsu's sides from spars and training, and he had heard the tones of joy and excitement in Shinsu's voice. He knew that Shinsu and Aizawa-sensei were close in some form. Likely Aizawa-sensei had been here the night before, which was the reason Shinsu had faceplanted in the couch. Kaminari exhaled shakily, still thrumming in anger. He lifted the phone off the hook, pressing the single button pre-programmed to their teacher's cell phone. It rang 4 times before picking up with a clipped, "What? Ai-sensei," Kaminari chirped, trying to keep his voice smooth so Minta wouldn't notice something was wrong from the other room. "So, what's UAS policy on slurs?" A pause, the faint buzzing that Kaminari could feel in his bones. The line was still in use, which meant that Aizawa was speechless instead. "Slurs in terms of what context?" Aizawa spoke curtly. "Oh, you know." Kaminari tried to repress the anxious giggle. Sequel ... ity. A pause, more buzzing. "Are you stating that a student used a slur against another student?" "Not your student," Kaminari clarified with a small wince, tapping his fingers on the wall uncomfortably. "Well, you know, kinda your student but more like a stepchild." Kaminari. "Yeah, the purple one," Kaminari blurted with a slight whine in tone. Another pause. "Minta used a slur about sexuality against Shinsu." And Kaminari winced again. ... One about his gender too. "I mean, well, he looked really upset. Walked out really fast and looked super upset, sensei." "Understood." Aizawa spoke flatly, smoothly. "I'll handle this. Thank you." A different buzz. Aizawa had hung up on him. "This beach empty," Mina screamed at 3 p.m. to the mostly empty dorm. "Yeet," Kirishima helpfully shouted back, slamming buttons on the video game console he was playing with. "Yo Mina, what's up?" Mina sprinted across the lounge, hopping clumsily over Uraraka, who blinked wide-eyed at her approach. Mina kept running, as if nothing happened. Her hands slapped into the coffee table. Her eyes were glittering and alight with awe. No, Kirishima, the beach is empty." Kirishima paused his game, then set his controller down tentatively. ... Yet. Mina's grin split her face widely. "The G is gone." Uraraka dropped her calculator. It clattered to the floor loudly. Her face was blank, stunned. Minta is gone." "I know," Mina squealed, clapping her hands together excitedly. "Maybe all our requests about Mint got through." "Minta, bro." Kirishima stared at his game dumbly. "What did he do?" "PSS off someone, city hair." Bakugo grunted, walking into the lounge, a bowl of recently cut fruit in his hands, sweatpants low on his hips and a casual tank top for their day off. Heard the sour wine beaching and moaning through the goddamn walls. Mina stared for a second before she cackled. "Oh, I get it, wine like wine. Because he's a G." Bakugo bristled. "You saying my insult was bad?" "No," Mina cooed in delight. "You can't ruin my mood, blasty. The beach is empty." "Yeet." Uraraka shrieked in delight from across the room. Todoroki was sitting in the shade of a big oak tree. He had an old book in his hands, suffering abuse and tea stains. It smelled a bit odd, but he liked his book more than anyone could believe. It was one of his more cherished possessions, even if it was outdated. He got it as a gift from a librarian, visiting the hospital for her husband who had undergone a surgery. Todoroki knew he was a sad sight, face covered in gauze and too small in the big bed. The pediatrics unit was filled with unskilled doctors according to his father, so he was shuttled away to a private room in a lonely hallway. His mother was forced away, and many nights Shadow lay in bed lonely in the dark. The librarian felt pity. He knew that, but she gave him one of the books she had with her at the time. Shadow couldn't understand the old slang of the time, especially since the book was written a ridiculous length of time ago, but he loved it once he managed to swallow the words. Todoroki was flipping through the pages, able to recite portions nearly word for word. The sunlight was bright and the shade was a nice relief. Then, someone walked right up to him. He had half a mind to ignore them and hope they went away. Best case, it was one of the general education students who wanted an autograph from his father and would run away with a single glare. Oh, he heard instead, a slightly strained, winded voice. Todoroki peeked up and frowned firmly when he recognized his visitor faintly from the sports festival. His visitor, the mind controller, was staring at his book. "That's..." The mind controller trailed off, then reached into the patchwork bag on his side. Fishing around, he pulled out a paperback with a faded cover. "Oh," Todoroki blinked in empty-minded surprise. Same book. Shinsu Atoshi agreed, voice filled with indescribable mirth. The kinship of owning the same obscure book. Shinsu plopped himself down timidly. Todoroki could tell even with his limited experience with social interactions that something had happened to upset the other. Shinsu FLC curved through the book, turning to a single well-dog-eared page. A small glance from Todoroki's eye recognized the spot in the plot, and he found himself in dull agreement over the competency of the writing. "Begone, vile insect," Todoroki timidly offered. Shinsu's head snapped around so quickly that he nearly cracked his bones. He stared, eyes wide and surprised and equally timid. "Stay, that I might ... may trample you to dust." A small warmth set over Todoroki's heart, a sudden shyness he wasn't used to. It wasn't like Midoriya. It was more like an understanding. Shinsu smiled hesitantly, small and just as vulnerable. Todoroki looked back at his book and continued to read. The next time Todoroki saw Shinsu, it was in a heated discussion between his teacher and the tired boy. They seemed upset, or rather, Shinsu seemed upset, animated, and his eyes seemed slightly glassy. Todoroki had come in just to get staff permission to access the pool. He didn't mean to intrude. We'll discuss this later. Aizawa snapped out, bloodshot eyes spotting Todoroki. Get to class. Shinsu's shoulders rose. He hunkered in on himself. Todoroki felt the strangest twist in his stomach, something that felt wrong and itchy. He didn't know what to say, especially with Aizawa-sensei looking at him. Todoroki fumbled and blurted awkwardly, "But beware, your hours will pass in dread and misery." Shinsu tilted his head slightly. The glassy look in his eyes shifted as he smiled the smallest bit. "Have I not suffered enough, that you seek to increase my misery?" Todoroki felt an answering tiny grin. Shinsu started to smile so wide he couldn't help it. "What?" Aizawa deadpanned. After class, when they were exhausted and filtering into the dorm building, the lesson with All Might was grueling, sore and painful on a degrading level. Even Bakugo was tired enough to not complain. Sero kicked open the doors, slowly dragging himself inside the dorms. Everyone followed behind him like a long, exhausted train of students. Aizawa was standing in front of them, hands in the pockets of his jumpsuit. His scarf was wrapped around him, hair looking recently washed for once. "Oh, come on." Kirishima groaned in dismay at the sight of their teacher. "This is our rest time." "Is there an issue, sensei?" Midoriya gasped, pushing forward through the crowd worriedly. "Is it about why Mina has been gone for a couple days? He got expelled, dipshit." Bakugo roared, looking ready to deck Midoriya in the face. "Yeah, something like that." Aizawa sighed tiredly. "We're getting a transfer to fill in." "Yes, I expelled Mina." "Hey." Tsuyu blinked in surprise. "Did our reports finally make a difference, Ribbit?" Aizawa blinked slowly. "Something like that." "Don't kill this one, Bakugo." Bakugo fumed, flushing red although he looked too exhausted to really pitch a fight. "Hi," Shinsu muttered uncomfortably, clearly unsettled at the eyes of everyone. Ajiro stiffened, then coldly brushed past. Hagakure took off after him, worriedly calling his name. "Hi." Mina offered a grin. "You're the brainwash guy. Nice to meet you." Shinsu gave a small shaky nod, not liking the attention. "Shinsu, it's wonderful to see you again." Midoriya beamed. "Ah, this is wonderful. You're finally in the hero course." Yeah." Shinsu rubbed the back of his neck uncomfortably. Todoroki stepped forward. A small hush settled over the class. Todoroki tilted his head to the side slightly. "Oh no," Kaminari whispered to himself, ready to separate the two if necessary. Bakugo laughed, walking his way to the kitchen for a protein shake. "Let daddy issues at him." Everyone held their breath as Todoroki kept walking, a mere arm's length away from Shinsu. He could see the unique shade of gray that made up the majority of Shinsu's eye bags. "There can be no community between you and me. We are enemies. Be gone, or let us try our strength in a fight in which one must fall." Todoroki spoke in a completely flat monotone. The class stared. Shinsu's eyebrows furrowed ever so slightly so that a crease formed between his eyebrows. "William," Shinsu said so confidentially. Uraraka felt a moment of dread that he had messed up Todoroki's name that badly. "Dear angel, this is thy funeral, this thy dirge." A moment of pause. Todoroki smiled. "What is happening?" Kaminari whispered, looking ready to cry. "I'm Momo." "Momo, what is happening?" Momo looked struck. I don't know. He was our darling, he was our pride." Todoroki responded flatly, looking strangely excited and content with the nonsensical ramblings. "Oh God," Mina whispered, sitting down heavily on the floor. It didn't get better with time. Bakugo was so startled to hear Todoroki shout in the middle of training, "I will be with you on your wedding night," that Bakugo missed a shot and ended up slamming face first into Tsuyu's foot. The Old English sounded completely wrong, and only became worse when present Mike started stumbling over cut-off phrases. Aizawa sighed, rubbed his eyes and stated fairly loudly, "Shinsu, Todoroki, please, no more Shakespeare." "It isn't Shakespeare." Todoroki deadpanned, and acted like he said nothing at all. Shinsu wasn't amazing at sparring. It was to be expected since he hadn't really ever experienced any sort of hero training before, but his close combat skills were dismal at best. His body was too slender, long and lanky in all the weirdest proportions. He didn't have a stocky sort of muscle yet. The thickest spot on his thigh was likely thinner than Bakugo's biceps themselves. In a spar against Shoji, he had no hope. He could hold his own against Hagakure, since the Invisible Girl's specialty was more focused on underground work anyways. There was a certain sort of parallel between Shinsu's own style that was very similar to Eraserhead's, although it was still awkward and young in shape. His use of the capture weapon was still clumsy, messing up over and over. His quirk, though, that was something special. Shinsu had a knack for knowing exactly what to say. that paralleled even Bakugo's impressive array of insults. Purple eyes could narrow in on anyone and in seconds recognize the weakest lines of their insecurity, finding cracks in their armor like it was as easy as tearing paper. Small moments made Midoriya thankful that Shinsu had never decided to turn villain, especially when the purple-haired teen almost lazily destroyed Bakugo's array of insults directed at him. How did he know to go after his pride? Deku, Uraraka whispered, watching the scene in slow-motion horror. There was a form of beauty in it, a form of appealing kinship. I don't know, Midoriya confessed, and watched the destruction with awe. They never really addressed it until Monoma invaded their class once again, and this time threw his metaphorical acid at both Todoroki and Tsuyu, who was looking rather under the weather. There was no classmate of Monomo's to pull him back. There was nobody to stop the verbal assault. It wasn't bad, but people were stressed enough as it was, and only so many thumbtacks could poke into your skin before you snapped. Todoroki hunkered in on himself, glaring frostily. Tsuyu made a small choked croak as one of the insults dug a little too deeply. Shinsu stood from where he had taken Mina's seat, his chair scraping the ground softly. Monoma turned his assault on the new purple-haired teen, grinning widely before jumping into insults so potent they could have caught fire. Shinsu yawned, his jaw flexing as he tried to contain it. He looked more exhausted than usual, everything about him looking dull. Can you just leave? Then Monoma jumped into a new tirade. He turned, leaving one sharp barb at Todoroki. I heard your mother is in a mental institution. How pitiful that beloved Class 1 is housing a lunatic. There was a sharp inhale of breath from Mina, a wide-eyed gape from Momo. Ada jumped to his feet, although Tsuyu held him back with one large hand. Todoroki flinched, staring at his desk with a quivering jaw. That's it, you. Bakugo started, jolting to his feet. Kaminari held out one hand, keeping Bakugo back. Timidly, Kaminari locked eyes with Shinsu, who was looking particularly furious. Shinsu, get him, Kaminari called out weakly, a small nod to assure Shinsu it would be okay. Midoriya opened his mouth to try and fix the situation, and Shinsu's face split into a lazy grin that looked patronizing at best. He leant against a nearby desk, looking clearly happy to be anywhere else. Oi, Monoma, I'm sorry your dad beat you instead of cancer. A pause. OFCK. Mina hissed out in sympathy. Kirishima gaped and looked at Kaminari, who gave a small wince at the barb. Monomo didn't say anything. He paled, turned and quietly left the room. The door closing was loud in the hush of the room. You okay? Shinsu glanced out of the corner of his eye at Todoroki. Todoroki nodded, staring at the surface of his desk. Let me know if that DCK bothers you again. Shinsu jerked his head at the door, casually climbing back into his seat to rest his chin on his forearms. The door opened and Aizawa walked in, looking a bit annoyed as he looked around the room, still overwhelmed with the viciousness of Shinsu's insult. Why was a student bawling in the hallway? He asked, voice flat. That was me, Shinsu called from his desk, not even lifting his head. His hair was standing particularly crazy. He insulted him. Hagakure weakly provided. Aizawa frowned slightly, his sharp eyes taking in the state of the room, and Todoroki's still shaky composure. Shinsu, yeah, I know. Shinsu mumbled into his arm, looking ready to take a nap. Don't obliterate the children. Aizawa inhaled through his nose. It whistled slightly. Stay behind after class. Everyone get your books out already. They scrambled, and Shinsu took a nap. Todoroki stayed after class as well, feeling particularly guilty. It was his fault that Shinsu was getting in trouble. He wasn't really that close to the boy, but he did feel bad that it was due to Todoroki's own inability to defend himself that he would be getting in trouble. Are you coming with, Todoroki? Uraraka chimed, tilting her head curiously. Deku said that we're gonna grab some ice cream before heading back to the dorms. Todoroki looked at the stack of books on his desk. No thank you, Uraraka. I wish to speak with Aizawa. Okay, she smiled, waving before skipping off to where Midoriya and Ida were going to meet her. The classroom was quiet, Shinsu barely hanging on to awareness. Todoroki, you're dismissed. Aizawa deadpanned from his desk, nearly matching Shinsu in appearance and lethargy. I wish to remain to discuss how Shinsu's actions shouldn't be held against him. Todoroki explained simply. It was my own inability to defend myself which led to Shinsu insulting Monoma. Aizawa cracked his eyes open wider. Is that so? Don't be strong on him, sensei. Shinsu croaked from his desk tiredly. It wasn't that bad. It was the most vicious insult I have ever heard. Todoroki summarized. Aizawa sighed through his nose again. Shinsu, he was asking for it. Shinsu muttered sourly. Really, he deserved it. Aizawa rubbed his eyes. Whether he deserved it or not does not warrant you to insult him so severely. Such actions, if repeated, may lead to punishment out of my jurisdiction. And I mean it, Shinsu. Shinsu huffed and glanced over at Todoroki with the smallest twist of his mouth. Todoroki. Yes, Todoroki responded in lack of ideas of what to say. Shinsu gave the smallest nod of his head. I inherited my quirk from my dad, but it's a mutant. My dear old mum had a wonderful quirk which always knew what insults to use. Todoroki blinked twice in surprise. I haven't heard of a quirk like that before. Because it's rare. Aizawa cut in, glaring at Shinsu sharply. It's a foresight quirk mixed with a mental quirk. The worst stigmas are based around such. Shinsu flipped his hand dismissively. Basically, I know the best insults to use, and I need a response to use my main quirk. Todoroki shivered slightly and felt very exposed. You have information on everyone you ever meet then, which may be private, which is why you are not supposed to use your quirk. Aizawa cut in sharply. This is confidential information. Understood, Todoroki said. For what it counts, I'm sorry. Shinsu added in simply. I know your life is very difficult. Todoroki shrugged. Your life appears to be difficult also. Shinsu huffed a quiet laugh. Yeah, it's better now. Mum can't get on campus, and as much as I hate my quirk, I hate hers more. Todoroki kicked a pebble on the road. Does it hurt to use it? No, Shinsu said simply. But it hurt growing up with it. Bro, when did you and Todoroki get so close? Kaminari asked him, sprawled over his lap in the mountain of cat-stuffed animals. Shinsu's room was mostly empty with the exception of dozens of cat-stuffed animals. Some looked cheap, others looked very expensive and gorgeous in texture and design. Kaminari didn't know where they all came from, and it sometimes took him off guard with the bare minimal design of his room and then bam, stuffed animals. He's cool, Shinsu stated simply, running his fingers over the soft plush lovingly. Quiet, but nice. Man, you must hate Bakugo then. Shinsu smirked and looked away. I like his nicknames, they're funny. Kaminari groaned. He keeps calling me Pikachu. I'm not. I'm like Zapdos. You're a bidoof. Shinsu hummed, reaching through the pile of cats to fish around for something. Seriously though, these dorms are amazing. I was going to kill for soundproof walls and here we are. Please don't kill me. Kaminari jokingly laughed out. I'm too appealing to die. Midoriya felt like he walked into a horror film. Shinsu and Todoroki were sitting across from each other, legs folded carefully with the small coffee table between them. Both were willingly ignoring the perfectly good couches in favor of looking like businessmen at a board meeting. That's a fair point. Todoroki nodded, tilting his head ever so slightly. However, I believe I relate more since my father FC King SCK. Shinsu made a small hum of thought, taking a sip from his tea. That's a good point also. I could say my mother SCK, but since we're being as compliant as possible, I relate because given the opportunity people would chase me with pitchforks. Todoroki made a noise of interest in his throat. Oh, true. Midoriya very quickly left the room. Dabai, Todoroki hissed out with such utter loathing unprompted. Uraraka actually jumped. Todoroki stood, walked out of the room without saying anything else. Out of curiosity more than anything, Uraraka followed. Todoroki walked up the stairs, all the way to Shinsu's dorm. He knocked twice and waited. The door opened pitch black inside. Shinsu blearily blinked, looking like he was napping. Dabai, Todoroki spoke flatly. Shinsu inhaled with a gasp. Dear God. The movie. Kirishima cheered dramatically, falling off his seat on the kitchen island. The movie. Staples guy. Frankenstein. Todoroki very slowly looked at Shinsu. Shinsu said nothing, and still, Kirishima felt like he had been insulted so cruelly. Actually, Frankenstein is his creator. But, since he's practically the monster's father, we can assume he'd inherit the name. Todoroki responded almost like they had planned it. Also, Frankenstein is a kick-ass name and Victor doesn't deserve it. Shinsu stuck the peanut butter knife in his mouth to stretch on his tiptoes, and high-fived Todoroki. Kirishima grinned so wide at the sight of brotherly kinship, his face started to hurt. Bakugo woke up Shinsu, slamming on his door with a fist. Shinsu opened it, slowly creeping out with a feeling of dread pulling in his gut. What? Moldy prune, get outside. Bakugo huffed with a look of frustration like he wasn't being paid enough to bother Shinsu. Strawberry shortcake has his deadbeat chicken nugget here for some hero sit. Shinsu was still tired by the realization woke him up with ice in his BLT. His dad is outside. I said that. UFC King brain leech. Bakugo sneered before he punched the wall dramatically. Wow, Shinsu thought distantly. These dorms really are built better. Go make that flaming marshmallow cry. Bakugo sneered with a vicious light in his eye. I'm too important to PSS him off. That's fair. Shinsu yawned against his will. Call Aizawa for me to do damage control. I'm not your FC King carrier pigeon. Bakugo screamed, although he was pulling out his cell phone already. Shinsu didn't have time to question how Bakugo supposedly knew that Shinsu was a roast MSDR. But right now he had a more important matter at hand. Shinsu didn't care that he was wearing an oversized shirt and stained sweatpants. His hair was fluffy and messed up on the side, where he had been sleeping. There was goop in his eyes, and a fire burning in his belly. He was ready to burn Endeavor in a way he never had experienced before. Hi Shinsu. Mina piped up from the couches, her smile starting to falter. Oh no. What are you doing? committing manslaughter, Shinsu casually informed her, shuffling to the tiny crowd near the front of the building. Ada was looking stressed. Midoriya's fists were white from his clenched hands. Shinsu ignored them, opened the door, and walked outside. Endeavor was wearing his hero uniform, wearing flames like the wings of dragon around him. The heat he was giving off was impressive, astronomical, and Shinsu was already starting to sweat. Hopefully this wouldn't last so long that he'd get pit stains in his sleep shirt. Todoroki had his head down. His cheeks had the faintest glimmer of a tear that had evaporated in the heat. "Oh, hell no." "Hi," Shinsu drawled from the steps, grinning wide in a way he knew people hated. He started to descend, careful not to step on a rock with his bare feet. "Shadow," Endeavor said, not even looking at Shinsu, like he wasn't worth his time. "I'm Shinsu, you know." Shinsu kept up the unsettling grin. "I'd say pleasure to meet you, but you know, lying is bad or something." Shinsu felt the heat of the fire increase, searing his skin even from the distance. Todoroki tensed further. Shinsu tasted lemon on his tongue, the sweet sting of citrus, starfruit mixed with BLD orange, sour and sugary on his lips. "Hey Shadow, mind giving me a moment?" Shinsu spoke, words coming to his lips without thought. Todoroki glanced up in surprise, and Endeavor's eyes narrowed in barely restrained fury. "Shadow, you will stay right here," Endeavor hissed out foully. Shinsu could see Aizawa approaching from the main building. Sweet, time to keep things short and snappy. Shinsu looked at Endeavor and tasted lime and passion fruit coat his tongue like slime. "You know, Endeavor," Shinsu started in a bored drawl, his smirk never faltering. "You look like you're going to waste your life having one epiphany after another, always thinking you've figured out what's holding you back, and how you can finally be the #1 hero and turn your life around." Shinsu tasted the sour bite of unripe G-fruit. "But nothing will ever change. That cycle of mediocrity isn't due to your failures of children, it's who you are. The thing standing in the way of the only thing you've ever wanted isn't your wife or children. What makes all your goals unobtainable is that the person having them is you." Shinsu didn't blink. His grin went wider and words spilled unfilled from his lips, although he didn't understand them. "You will never, ever be victorious. That's why all of your attempts turn to ash around you, like Talia." Endeavor took a step backwards, eyes wide in horror. Todoroki stared at his father's hand in fascination. It was trembling slightly. "Shinsu, Todoroki," Aizawa spoke, his voice elevated from the minor distance. "Get inside. Endeavor, you do not have documentation to be interacting on this side of campus. Perhaps we can remedy this issue if you come with me to see the principal." Shinsu kept grinning like a shark, even as Endeavor wordlessly followed Aizawa away into the distance. "Thank you," Shadow whispered shakily. Shinsu hadn't ever been thanked for that before. It warmed him and made him so sad. "Don't worry about it," Shinsu assured Todoroki with the smallest grimace as the backlash of his quirk made his mouth feel like ash. "Come on, let's get inside." This time Shinsu spotted a new tear on Todoroki's cheek. He didn't want to think of how it got there. "How much of this is you thinking this is actually a productive teaching method?" Shinsu began in a deadpan. "Compared to the amount of humor you're going to get out of this." Aizawa grunted quietly, not looking up from his laptop as he punched keys with far more force than necessary. "I can't tell you that. You're one of my brats now." Shinsu huffed quietly, a soft exhale as he slumped further down on the couch. "I don't know this class well, but you know this isn't going to go well. Just the main problem child," Aizawa corrected instantly, eyes not breaking from the synthetic glow in the late hours. "I'm contemplating excusing him entirely. I don't want more broken bones on top of this." Shinsu scowled and fumbled to grab a pillow. "It would be more helpful if you could, tell me what you're planning." "I don't make things easy." Aizawa deadpanned instantly. "Welcome to 1A. Class started with a visitor at the podium, beaming with a wide grin and a nice tidy sticker on the upper left side of her uniform. She didn't quite have the looks to be a professional hero. Midoriya wasn't mumbling under his breath in recognition, which led the class to a conclusion that they were very much in trouble. "Hello everyone." The new visitor was nearly vibrating out of her skin, dressed in modest and casual clothing, thick protective gear and chunky gloves. "I'm so happy to meet you all." Everyone blinked in a slow collective aura of dismay. "This is support expert Chaotic." Aizawa jerked one thumb, speaking muffled through his scarf. Shinsu was afraid to stare further, in case their teacher was trying to hide his malicious grin. "That's me," she chirped out, popping a pose that looked more like Ishido's style than the normal nondescript clothing. "I come every semester for the 3rd years. You all are lucky to be selected so early. I'm sure you all have a lot of promise." Koda could have whispered to the crickets to start playing with how awkwardly quiet the room was. Sensei," Momo asked from the back with a small frown. Guest speaker wasn't in the syllabus." "That's because I'm not just a guest speaker," Chaotic cheered. "I'm a professional support expert specializing in team and partner dynamics." More confused, blinking. "Because your classroom has some of the worst cooperativeness scores I've ever seen." Chaotic looked far too happy as she dished out a steaming burn. "I mean, wow. I thought Eraserhead was bad, but you all are like, well, atrocious. Hey, Aizawa mumbled with a scoff, ignoring the fact she continued to leave everyone in the room flushing from embarrassment or rage in Bakugo's part. Midoriya raised his hand, slowly and unsure. Support ... hero. Aid, Chaotic chirped, or just call me Chaotic. It's easier. Are you the problem child? You're the most plain one here. Somewhere from the back, Todoroki leant his face down to hide the small snicker that threatened to escape. Right, Midoriya gulped, trying to compose himself the best he could. So are Chaotic. What what are you helping us with? Is this a group assignment? Close, Chaotic beamed, and by that you're completely wrong. I have a nifty little quirk which is completely useless but great for making everyone suffer for a few days. I'm going to tap every one of you just to register you with my quirk. Then I'll be back at the end of the day to really get things exciting. Yes, Aizawa sighed, already knowing what Ida was going to argue. This is perfectly legal. It was, as Aizawa said, perfectly legal. Shinsu even checked, just to spite him. They had normal class. Midnight looked overly eager with a sharp grin as she fluttered between students, eyeing them all eagerly. Takoyami wasn't entirely sure what to think, but even his dark feathers couldn't hide his uncomfortable flush as she pounced on him with questions about how he was feeling. Maybe it's just me, Uraraka confessed, face scrunching in thought, but I think that Chaotic lady is up to no good. She's hired by the institution. Ida defended hurriedly. I'm sure Sensei wouldn't put us at harm. Midoriya frowned, his fist lifting to cover his mouth to muffle the ramblings. If her quirk needed physical contact and such a long time before taking effect, it could be something pretty significant, but the requirements would make it really strong for most fields. I haven't even heard of a quirk aid, but most hero agencies do have full medical staff and trainers, so. Deku, Uraraka grinned with a spark in her eye. You're mumbling again. I guess we just need to wait and see. Mina and Kaminari were exchanging bets when Chaotic skipped into the room, nearly tripping over a desk. Midnight was still in the room, watching everything with a wide grin. Aizawa rubbed his eyes tiredly. Already they were turning pink from having been awake so long. All right, guys, Chaotic shouted, pointing dramatically towards nothing in general. Shoji looked with one eye just to make sure it wasn't going to be like that one third year who could phase through walls. Time for everything to start. Some ground rules. Aizawa rolled out, pointing at the blackboard before he sighed and started writing. Momo hurried to copy the kanji and letters he wrote, making sure they had a record. First rule. All UA rules and codes are still in effect. You're not exempt from anything, so remember that. The word settled heavily like a stone in everyone's stomach. A moment of pause and confusion because what was this lady's quirk? Second rule, Aizawa started, jerking one thumb at the far too interested Midnight. Midnight will be on standby for all training exercises, as well as within the dorms for the duration. I will also, and I've contacted Ectoplasm to help us out for however long we need. Recovery Girl will also remain on campus until we're finished. Contact us if you need it. Sir, Ashido squeaked, not looking eager or excited now that so many pro heroes were being called in. Or ... is this going to leave us hurt? Hopefully not. Midnight cackled excitedly. Trust me, I love this. I get called in every year and it's delightful. Aizawa ignored her and began writing the standard contact information for each of the teachers assigned. Third rule. There is a chemical composition that will reverse the effects. If, for any reason, you want to be removed from the assignment, we can instantly do so, however it will have ramifications. The words hung heavy. Chaotic looked ready to tear someone apart with how excited she looked. Final rule, Aizawa sighed. We've contacted all necessary family members. You are not allowed to leave campus. It's a security risk. You've been assigned new training exercises, which is why you didn't have practice tonight. Tomorrow, instead of classes, you'll show up at the locations we'll specify in a while. Any questions? Nobody raised their hand, although Kaminari was looking a bit worried now. No, great. Chaotic beamed, hopping forward with her large gloves removed. Her fingers were normal-sized, with small ripples on the underside like a lizard's. My quirk is a deviant of the category shuffle. I can take common attributes and redistribute them, but the storage time is quite a while. Thank you all for waiting so long, so, without further ado, she fit the small ridges together. Then with a small snap of fingers against each other, something was grabbed and twisted. And the room shuddered, shivers racking down their body as something lifted and relaxed. Ooh, Ashido gasped in alarm, shuddering all over again. What was that? That felt horrible. Like the worst roller coaster ever, bro. Kirishima groaned, placing his head flat on his desk. Shinsu shuddered, glancing over at Todoroki, who was rather green. Great. Chaotic looked thrilled. Thank you so much, everyone. Remember, this will all wear off in a couple days. Don't worry about any side effects, and most importantly, be careful. You'll start noticing changes in a little while. Notice what? Bakugo shrieked, hands curling on the edge of his desk as his breathing was very well controlled, likely nauseous from the sudden jerk everyone felt. Oh well, Chaotic turned to look at Aizawa, who was face down on his desk looking suspiciously furious and very queasy. She got you too, Midnight chortled, tapping her fingers together. Oh, Hisashi is going to love this. Hang in there, kids, you've all had your quirks swapped. Surprise. Chaotic laughed. Oh my god. Shoji started first, blurting it out loud as the entire class took up residency on the first floor, desperately fighting off the urge to vomit on pillows hastily gathered. Since nobody truly understood what a quirk swap meant, it was an unanimous decision to stay in line of sight with everyone to make sure no side effects happen. It was startling that Shoji was the first to talk, and that it was an exclamation that normally wasn't his style. Shoji jerked upright, twisting his stomach and arms to look down his back, and wiggled a small but growing tail. Uraraka shrieked, flinching back from the strangely opossum-looking appendage. Far too skinny and pasty white. Put that away. Shoji stared before his head snapped around at Ajiro, who was looking rather stunned. Can you feel your tail? Hagakure asked. The weirdly translucent smoke of her body prodded the thick limb. No, Ajiro swallowed in shock, staring at his own tail in horror. I mean, I can feel it but not really ... move it. Oh my god. From there, things just rapidly exploded. It makes sense that Shoji got his first, Momo concluded with a small frown. His body is used to developing external limbs and Momo choked, jerking and yelping a strangled high-pitched noise as she looked at a small misshapen tumor. She inhaled, exhaled shakily and forced it down. Ajiro stared, and Momo looked very unsettled. Looks like we know who got Shoji's quirk. Hagakure giggled, Momo smiling weakly as she forced another weird development of flesh and organ to not grow out of her hand. Shinsu snorted, a loud ugly noise from where he was over on the floor, out of sight in the shadow of the coffee table. Kaminari dramatically started to drag himself across the floor. Dude, this is so cool. Who do you think you're going to get? I hope I don't get yours, Kirishima. Ashido laughed. I'd likely break my horns off. Uraraka intelligently contributed, lifting her hand where along the back of her forearm, a sharp lumpy protrusion like tree bark distorted her skin. Oh my god, Kirishima, I have your quirk. Oh my god, what is it doing to my freckles? Kirishima lit up. Oh, that's so cool, Uraraka. Want some pointers? Yeah. Uraraka smiled in delight. Whoa, Kirishima, your legs. Kirishima turned to look. Somehow, flames exploded from tiny underdeveloped engines, and he slammed into the wall. The wall did not survive. Oh no, Ada spoke, looking ashen. Drywall does not come out of engines easily. Aizawa-sensei got one of our quirks, Ribbit. Asui thought out loud, placing one of her hands on her chin. I wonder who, Ribbit. Something exploded, and it wasn't Bakugo. I am going to FC King kill you. Bakugo spoke, almost pleasant with how far gone to rage he was. Tone wasn't even a factor, instead it was flat, gentle, and horrifying. The class knew that Bakugo was not a villain, nor would he ever be. But right then and there, nearly everyone could easily imagine the normally violent teen standing on top of a mound of severed human limbs with the same calm, rational tone. Deku, I am going to eviscerate you with a sewing needle. Midoriya looked at his hand. The class had never seen someone rapidly cycle through the stages of grief before. Yet, Midoriya's face started through quite a journey. There was a clearly defined moment of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and the smooth, gentle pull of acceptance as Midoriya stared death in the face and had the gall to smile. Yeah, Deku sighed with a small nod. I think that's fair, Kakin. Bakugo looked fairly content as he too agreed manslaughter was justified. Uraraka looked up from her weirdly hardened arm and casually screamed for Midnight. I'm glad it's you. Todoroki spoke flatly. I think this is the best thing to have ever happened at UA. Yeah, Shinsu hummed in thought, fishing for his phone. Want to take a video and send it to your FC King overcooked Pop-Tart of a dad to give him a heart attack. Todoroki's eyes were suspiciously wet, although that could have been due to the, quite frankly, perverse amount of acid that was chewing through Shinsu's carpet. Please, I'll even say the ice is cooler on tape. Shinsu offered, smart enough to not even attempt summoning hellfire. No, I'll say that brainwashing really is better since I've tried out both. Todoroki hadn't remembered laughing so strong in years. Deku, Uraraka asked, poking her head into the kitchen worriedly. Deku, are you in here? He was, and looked like he was going through a crisis. Deku, she walked closer, spotting the thick heat-insulated oven mittens covering both of his hands. Are you okay? No, Midoriya confessed casually. I have Kakin's quirk. He is going to murder me after this, and I mean like, actually murder me. Uraraka frowned. Bakugo hasn't tried to kill you ever. He wouldn't. Midoriya laughed, sounding just a bit too shrill. Kakin wasn't trying to kill me before either, but he broke my bones and I ended up nearly dying. But Deku, you break your bones. Because of Kakin. Oh god, Uraraka, I really am going to die. Uraraka CLC her tongue, hopping onto the stool next to him. It can't be that bad. I'll stop him, I've got Kirishima's quirk now. It's pretty cool. Deku looked at her, eyes glazed and accepting. I'm very anxious, and I sweat when I'm anxious, and truly I think if I take these mitts off I'm going to kill everyone in this building. Uraraka could smell the explosives in the air, thick and sweet. That seems like a reasonable concern. Yep, Deku's voice was only slightly strangled. Do you think I should ask Aizawa-sensei for the reversing agent? Because either these gloves come off and nobody lives, or I keep these on and very slowly my fingers shrivel into non-existence. What if you dunked your hands in water? Uraraka offered. I don't think Bakugo can make explosions underwater. Anjiro is using the bath because he has a Sui's quirk. Deku sounded only slightly strained. I don't even know what everyone has, to be honest. Oh, I can help. Uraraka beamed. Todoroki has Ashido's quirk, so you can follow his slime trail to find him. But be careful because it does eat through your socks. And Shinsu has Todoroki's quirk, which is really good actually because Shinsu just sleeps a lot anyways. Midoriya giggled, high-pitched and strained. Kirishima has Ida's quirk. Yeah, and Ida has Koda's. Last I heard he was in a debate with a pair of birds outside. That sounds like Ida. Midoriya smiled weakly. Anjiro has Asui's quirk, and Asui is doing pretty good with Sero's tape. I guess their tongue was pretty similar. Hagakure has Momo's quirk, which is fine since she's only uncontrollably making cotton s, and Momo has Shoji's quirk and Shoji has Anjiro's. You should see Shoji's tail. Uraraka gasped. It's so cool. It's totally different than Anjiro's, but still really interesting. A scream from the other room, and the sound of something exploding. A second later, Gyro was screeching far too loudly about how her belly button ring apparently hadn't survived. Poor Gyro. Uraraka winced. She really liked that thing. Bro, that's so weird. Kaminari cackled, poking the metal protrusions out of Kirishima's leg. I know, Kirishima beamed, not looking too upset with the weird engines. But my calves, dude. They're so buff right now. That's so cool, Kaminari confessed, reaching out with one foot to poke Shinsu's side. Shinsu moaned into his pillow, barely awake from his casual nap nearby. I heard Ayama screaming about static. Kirishima laughed. Looks like he's got your electric mess, bro. It isn't a mess. Kaminari defended with a pout. At least I can see him. Sero, you look even more freaky and visible. From a seemingly empty spot on the couch, Sero groaned and flopped over the indentation, the only sign. Hagakure is pretty cute though, Kaminari confessed with a wistful sigh. I totally wasn't expecting the blue hair. Same, Sero groaned from his spot on the couch. My depth perception is utter shit, man. Kaminari winced and his nose wrinkled. Dude, what are we eating? I think like, there's a goddamn sour candy in here or something. Kirishima's eyebrows shot up. Dude, this is chocolate. Kaminari smacked his lips, wincing at the weird taste. Maybe I got Ashido's quirk or something. Ugh. I dunno. Kirishima shrugged, poking the temporary motors once again. Hey, Shinsu man, could we cook like an egg on your thigh? Leg so hot. Shinsu slurred out, face in his pillow. Hot leg. Kaminari beamed, and Sero groaned further on the couch. Shinsu very slowly became more alert when Ashido plopped over, playing with the long tendrils on her earlobes. What are you boys talking about? Nothing much. Kaminari grinned, prodding Shinsu's shoulder rapidly. Right. Why are you so annoying? Shinsu groaned, eyes squeezed shut. He shuddered and probed with one arm for a blanket. It's a natural talent. Kaminari grinned. It's to make up for your savage roasts. Kaminari's nose scrunched up as his mouth tasted foul all over again. Maybe he was going to puke or something. It tasted terrible. They aren't that bad. Shinsu defended. Kaminari opened his mouth and talked. Do you realize that people only tolerate you? After knowing you, I understand why everyone talks behind your back. Everyone who ever loved you is wrong. You're going to be abandoned by everyone because you're a villain. Shinsu flinched, choking on something as his eyes widened. The couch screamed, Kirishima leaping to his feet with a horrified bro. Ashido screeched so loud it was a miracle with her new ears. Kaminari UFC king. Sero just shouted in shock, everyone's jaws hanging in absolute disbelief and disgust. Shinsu though, his eyes welled and he looked like he was choking. The corner of his eye watered. It clattered onto the floor in a single piece of hail. Wait, Kaminari gagged, feeling more disgusted with himself than any nausea could make. Wait, Shinsu. Shinsu stiffened, and very quickly the light in his eyes died. No, Kaminari screeched, his insides clenching and jerking like a washing machine. FCK. No, bro, say something. Something. Shinsu deadpanned, dull and flat and emotionless. Ashido started screaming again. Kaminari FC King, stop. Dude, Kirishima's hands clenched his hair, desperately tugging. Dude, stop it. I'm trying, I said. Shinsu, can you hear me? Don't order him, you used up AA battery. Ashido wailed, let him go. Kaminari floundered. Thankfully, Kirishima thought for him and casually reached out and decked Shinsu in the arm. Shinsu whirled around and plopped off the couch, eyes FLC curring back to light as he grimaced. Ugh, sit, sorry about that. Kirishima stared. Everyone watched for the imminent breakdown. Bro, Kaminari wailed, throwing himself to grab Shinsu in a sloppy hug. Oh my god, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean any of that. Oh my god, no, I love you, bro. I love you and you feel like a goddamn microwaved Hot Pocket. Shinsu made a noise of annoyance. I'm not a Hot Pocket, you fungus. You totally are, Kaminari mumbled into his side. You're hot on the outside and frozen on the inside. We're the one side. Can you even use Todoroki's quirk? I've heard the stories, Shinsu stated vaguely. I can, and I will, sneeze on you. Everyone stumbled to the training session, some people stumbling over tails in particular. All right, Midnight clapped her hands together excitedly. So, I'm sure you've all had time to get used to your new quirks. Since we're still learning, we're going to take this nice and easy. We want you to experiment with your new quirk to better understand your classmates. Be careful and be safe. Midoriya stared at his hands, coated in thick oven mitts. Uraraka patted his side encouragingly. You can partner with me, Deku. That way I can work on my hand-to-hand and you won't hurt me. Deku nodded mutely and followed her to the side. Where's Mikabro? Kirishima chewed on his lower lip nervously. I haven't seen him in hours. He locked himself in his room. Ashido shrugged, twirling her long lobes around her two little horns. I think he's on his way over here, but he has not been happy. When Bakugo arrived, the training area watched with a bated breath. Deku, Bakugo spoke in a deadpan, tilting his head to the side. His neck popped with an audible crack, eyes narrowed furiously. You and me. Now, who hasn't been accounted for yet? Shinsu muttered under his breath, eyeing Bakugo with a downwards tilt of his mouth. Kaminari tried to think quickly. Sato, Sugar Rush could be wicked with Bakugo. Oh sit, my electricity hasn't come out yet. Wait, yes it has. Poor Ayama. Uraraka didn't look sure when Deku very quietly stepped away and accepted his death via honorable combat. For the record, Kakin. Deku spoke flatly, accepting and numb to the world around him. Your quirk really hurts. Why the FCK do you think I have calluses, UFCK? Bakugo snarled, looking like an angry bull with how wide his nostrils flared. Someone is going to die today. Gyro whispered, her hand on Momo's arm to steady her. Give me everything you've FC got. Bakugo snarled. Midoriya nodded and sighed, taking the mitts of his hands. They looked wrinkled and red and very, very sore. A few spots looked burned and blistered. Sparks popped, which made Bakugo look even more PSS by the second. You're going to have to drag Bakugo off him. Shinsu muttered quietly to Kaminari, eyes watching the disaster with a frown. His eye bags looked more sickly, purpling and bruised with how pale his skin was. A fine sprinkling of frost decorated the hair in front of his ears. His eyelashes were accumulating small clumps of ice. Great, Kaminari muttered, trying to lasso the wild mustang that he fondly labeled Shinsu's sassy skill. Midoriya charged, palms cracking. Bakugo rushed forward and nothing happened. Oof, Ashido winced, flinching back as Midoriya impacted with one power stomp to his stomach. Midoriya flew, landing on the ground in a groan. Bakugo approached with all the rage of a middle-aged woman in search of a manager. Are you going to stop them? Todoroki asked, sliding in next to Shinsu. Oh hey, Kaminari grinned, trying not to be disgusted with the thoroughly slimy coating that turned the heterochromatic teen into a melting ice sculpture of a sea cucumber. You're looking a damp. Thank you, Todoroki responded. I smell like apricots. Kaminari didn't know what to do with that knowledge. Midoriya, bless his hard and insane willpower, was not doing so hot. Sure, he had Bakugo's explosions and the muscle to control the trajectory, but he didn't have any of the finesse. The raw talent was gone, detonating a moment too late, and every time Bakugo was there to slam a leathery fist into Midoriya's neck. Should we stop the fight? Shinsu asked, flinching as Midoriya this time was flipped the explosion a second too late. Midoriya hasn't broken any bones yet. Todoroki provided his input. He's fine. I think he just lost a tooth. Kaminari's voice raised in pitch with his stress. He's fine. Todoroki barely blinked. Bakugo cackled and punched Deku so strong in the skull the latter slumped to the ground boneless. Holy shit, Kirishima gaped. I didn't think that was possible. They stared. Midoriya did not get up. I feel like I just saw a unicorn. Shinsu stared, not able to tear his eyes away. What the hell? What is this class? Bakugo wiped the sweat off his brow, stretched with a wince, and looked at the rest of the class. Who else? Which one of you F-Seekers wants to fight me? Okay, now he's not fine. Todoroki confirmed with a slow nod. Kaminari resisted the urge to cradle his head in his hands. Oh, Momo inhaled sharply, eyes widening ever so slightly. He has Sensei's quirk. He can erase quirks. Ashido squeaked in fear. Her earlobes flailed, betraying her emotions. Oh, Kirishima started. Okay, well, Bakugo could murder any of us then. Todoroki weighed his odds. This may be my only opportunity then. I'll fight you, Bakugo. Kaminari stared. Dude, he's going to literally kill you. Todoroki didn't blink, but he did have a nice puddle forming around his shoes that smelled faintly like cantaloupe. I can only dream. Bakugo did indeed destroy everyone. The fact is, Bakugo already had a habit for staring at his opponents like they were prey. He already had MSDR, the terrifying grin and delighted expression that haunted Takoyami in his dreams. Bakugo normally smelled like smoke, normally rattled with explosions and the idea of bodily harm. Without the explosions, all he was left with were muscles as large as Hagakure's blue-haired head, an insane grin, and BLD red eyes that gave no clue when they activated, unlike their teacher. So, Bakugo stretched, looking tired after a particularly draining workout. Nobody, except Ajiro, was decent enough to take Bakugo actually on in sparring, not accounting for unfamiliar quirks and the fact that Bakugo had already knocked out Midoriya. Who the hell is left? 1 second. Midnight paused, her brows scrunching as she listened to a small speaker in her ear. We'll have to cut this short. Aizawa destroyed what? Okay. Your teacher just broke your dorms. Bakugo stared. What? If it helps, Midnight offered pleasantly. I heard he also broke his hand. A groggy Midoriya cheered from the ground. That's karma, sensei. Then promptly passed out again. So, what have we all learned? Kaminari lifted one hand with a wince. Shinsu's quirk gives you migraines. I'm filing for joint custody. Sato growled lowly, glaring at Takoyami, who was acting very protective of Dark Shadow. I filled the UAS infirmary cotton supply for life. Hagakure blurted, thankfully invisible once more. Oh, and I finally cut my hair in a mirror. Don't I look cute, guys? Ajiro hugged his tail tightly. I like my tail. My tongue should not touch my chin. No exceptions. I get motion sickness, Koda whispered, shuddering at the memory of floating away. Birds have no concept of tax evasion. Ada sulked. Apparently my head is just naturally strong. Kirishima beamed. It's not just my normal quirk. I can bust down walls like no big deal all the time. Midnight blinked and nodded politely, trying not to laugh. Kirishima's quirk gave me eczema. Uraraka chimed in chipper. But I think I killed every zit on my body, so I'm really happy for that. Sensei broke his hand. Asui croaked out tiredly. And 4 of our rooms. And the renovations are still going on. Ribbit. Sensei didn't seem to like his new quirk. Good point. Do you have anything to contribute, Midoriya? Midnight asked playfully. Midoriya gazed into the distance, looking haunted beyond words. He looked back from the window, pale and enlightened with information he never wanted to know. Midnight leaned forward, eager for whatever he had to say. I have drunk, Midoriya started in a whisper, so much water.